Chapter 201. After Dorbef signed the surrender document, Daniel proceeded to occupy the Defense Command headquarters. He expelled all former defense personnel and replaced them with key figures from his own side. Originally, he had intended to take over City Hall, but considering potential backlash from the citizens, he decided to use the Defense HQ as a temporary command post instead. Fortunately, the citizens of Fenbark voiced little opposition to the Empire's military occupying the Defense HQ. They already knew they had lost. To them, the absorption of the city's military institutions by the Empire was an inevitable consequence. And so, Daniel and Lucy were now working out of the defense commander's office. The reason they were conducting operations from the occupied city was simple. Even though they had taken control of Fenbark, it didn't mean they were free from danger. Remnants of the enemy forces or resistance cells might still be active, and there was a significant possibility that the Allied nations had not yet given up on providing reinforcements to Fenbark. Moreover, stabilizing the city and securing the cooperation of its citizens inevitably required them to bury themselves in mountains of paperwork. As a result, Lucy, who had been assisting Daniel all day, was suddenly struck with a headache. Thus with no warning, pain seared through her skull. Gritting her teeth, she pressed a hand to her forehead. But the headache only grew worse. The moment it felt like a bolt of lightning was exploding in her brain, Lucy saw something. Good haul today, huh? What she saw were voices, likely belonging to coachmen, and a wagon filled with children in the cargo bed. As she stared at the children in their ragged clothes, the coachmen's voices continued. But why do they pay so much for orphans over at Black? Don't really know. I heard the order came from Black personally. Huh? I was told it was from Black. Is it really true, then, that they're doing human experiments on the orphans? The wagon jostled as it hit a stone. Speculate all you want, but don't go saying that out loud. If something goes wrong, we'll be the ones losing our heads. Got it. Still, people say war makes monsters of men, and it's true. What did these kids ever do to deserve this? Damn shame. The hell are you talking about, like you're not part of this? With the coachman's laughter, her vision snapped back to normal. What now lay before her wasn't a wagon full of children, but a stack of documents filled with military terminology. Dazed and disturbed by what she'd just seen, Lucy blinked in confusion. Captain! Startled by Daniel's voice, Lucy quickly lifted her head. A brigadier. Daniel frowned slightly as he studied her blank, absent-minded expression. Something wrong? I've been calling you for a while now, but you weren't responding. You don't look well. Lucy nearly told him about the strange vision, but shook her head. She didn't want to worry him with memories she couldn't even explain. It's nothing. I think I just dozed off for a moment. Dozed off, huh? Daniel still eyed her suspiciously, but didn't press the issue further. Well, we've been through quite a lot getting here. I suppose it's only natural for your mind and body to be worn down. You may leave early today. Go ahead and pack your things. With that, Daniel lowered his gaze and began writing with his fountain pen. It was clearly a report, and after a brief hesitation, Lucy asked quietly, "Are you writing the report for General Staff?" Daniel nodded as he continued scribbling. They wanted a detailed explanation of how the battle unfolded. Even after I sent the combat log, they didn't believe it. I guess we fought too well. Daniel brushed it off with a chuckle, but Lucy couldn't help feeling guilty. Because she had acted without permission, Daniel was now stuck dealing with all the aftermath alone. Feeling like she was walking on eggshells, Lucy mumbled, "I'm sorry, because of me you." Suffering is hardly the word. Finishing the report, Daniel signed his name at the bottom. It's already behind us, and thanks to you, our company got through without losing a single life. As their commanding officer, I should be the one thanking you. Honestly, I should be giving you a medal. Daniel, who had just made every effort to say I'm on your side, you know that right, tucked the report away and opened a drawer. Speaking of rewards, I recall you're fond of desserts, which reminds me. After placing the report inside and closing the drawer, Daniel looked over at Lucy. Once the resistance remnants are cleared and administrative measures are finalized, we'll be able to take some rest. How about spending some time at a dessert shop when that happens? A dessert, sir? Yes, I asked around a bit about the city. There's a shop known for its lemon drizzle cake. Crisp on the outside, moist on the inside, soaked in lemon syrup. It's apparently elegant and refreshing, and people won't stop praising it. Lucy's mouth began to water. They say the shop also serves chilled black tea with the cake. The crisp, clean flavor of the tea balances the sweetness and lets you enjoy the soft, sugary taste like it's your first bite every time. Her face remained expressionless, but her eyes sparkled with life. It was obvious to anyone that she wanted to go, so Daniel sealed the deal. If you'd like, I can tell you the name and location of the shop. Daniel had made an offer she couldn't refuse, but inwardly his thoughts were elsewhere. While Lucy's at the dessert shop, I need to visit the lab Hamthel mentioned. The research facility tied to the Lucy project was located right here in this city. He hadn't wanted it to be this way, but now that they had taken Fenbark, he had no reason not to visit it. Once the urgent matters were taken care of, he planned to distract Lucy and investigate the lab on his own. Bringing soldiers along would be safer, but Daniel had his reasons. No one else can know about the Lucy project. Depending on how the information was handled, both Lucy and Daniel himself could be placed in grave danger, so he had to tread carefully. With that in mind, Daniel had hoped to separate her. But as expected, things didn't go as planned. If you're going to, I'll come. To Lucy, whether or not there was dessert was irrelevant. What mattered was whether Daniel would be with her. At the same time, Allied Nations Command Headquarters. Immediately after the operational meeting. How exactly am I supposed to accept that Fenbark has fallen? Do you expect the Supreme Commander to just nod quietly at such news? Count Kalidra, a special advisor directly under the Supreme Command, snarled at Supreme Commander Bemaret in the now-empty conference hall, with only the two of them remaining in the vast room. Bemaret replied with an air of resignation. It's not as if we refused their request for reinforcements. We simply couldn't divert troops from the front lines, and it took time to gather what forces we could. From a strategic perspective, Bemaret's explanation wasn't wrong. No one had expected Fenbark, believed to be able to hold out for a month, to fall in less than 2 weeks. Grinding his teeth at the thought that it was Daniel Steiner who had done it, Kalidra spoke through clenched jaws. Where are the reinforcements now? Near the Edelbatter Mountains, about 300 kilometers from Fenbark. If we force-march them, they could arrive within 8 days, but I don't see the point. Daniel Steiner will have already laid traps and is surely waiting for them. Kalidra raised a hand and pressed it to his forehead. After a long pause to steady his breath, he murmured, Fenbark cannot be handed over. That place must not fall into his hands. Count Kalidra, I understand Fenbark's symbolic significance to the Allied nations, but it's not worth suffering catastrophic attrition. No, even if it comes at great cost, we must take it back. Kalidra swept a hand down his face, gripped his cane, and rose to his feet. Supreme Commander, order the reinforcements to hold position at their current location. Count Kalidra, as I said, our chances of success are slim. Our chances are favorable. Cutting him off, Khalidra looked down silently at the seated Supreme Commander. Gather every last scrap of etherlium remaining in the allied nations. The Empire believes we've depleted our etherlium reserves, which means, if we use etherlium for a blitz assault, not even Daniel Steiner will be able to anticipate it. Hearing that, Bemaret leapt to his feet in protest. Count Khalidra, you're suggesting we pour all the etherlium we've gathered from across the country into the operation to retake Fenbark. If we burn through it now, we'll be in a resource drought for months. Retake Fenbark, do you really think that's what I care about? At the Count's cold, hollow tone, Bemaret visibly flinched. Supreme Commander, my objective is simple, eliminate Daniel Steiner and... Khalidra's eyes narrowed into slits. This time I will command the army myself. Now prepare my transport. You'll be commanding in person. That's right. It was the first time Count Khalidra, always issuing orders from the safety of the rear, had declared that he would lead the army in person. Which meant one thing. Khalidra saw Daniel Steiner as a threat significant enough to warrant that level of action. To hunt down a rampaging wolf. Staring out the window, Khalidra gripped his cane tightly. Daniel Steiner's face seared into his mind. This is the only way. Chapter 202. 5 days later. A famous dessert shop in Fenbark. How is it? Did the lemon drizzle cake suit your taste? On the outdoor terrace of the shop's second floor, Lucy, having cleaned her plate thoroughly, nodded while dabbing the corner of her mouth with a handkerchief. It was delicious, also. Lucy turned her head in the direction of the breeze. The gravel path, faintly imbued with the evening air, glowed softly under the moonlight. Most of the streetlights were turned off due to wartime administrative measures, but the countless stars adorning the sky lent their brightness to the ground. From in front of the old fountain in the distant plaza, the faint sound of street musicians playing gently could be heard. Even though this was unmistakably wartime, and there was no sign of the war ending, for some reason, this place felt incredibly peaceful. Turning her gaze away from the plaza, Lucy looked at Daniel. Thank you for letting me spend time in a place as lovely as this. Hearing you say, that makes me feel the reservation for my adjutant was worth it. Daniel joked as he picked up a cup of tea. Just as he was about to take a sip of the black tea. Brigadier General, what kind of life would you want to live once the war is over? His hand, mid-tilt, came to a stop. Daniel was momentarily taken aback, but he soon regained his composure and took a sip of the tea. After savoring the coolness that lingered in his mouth, he set the cup down with a graceful motion. A life after the war. I didn't expect to be asked that by my adjutant. My apologies if I was being inappropriate. No, that's not it. It's not something I can't share. Daniel wiped his mouth with the handkerchief on the table. If Her Majesty permits it, I'd like to retire. Retire, sir? When Lucy asked as though it was unexpected, Daniel nodded. Yes, I know there are quite a few who call me a warmonger, but that's all a misunderstanding. From the past to now, my lifelong goal has always been to live a leisurely life. Thinking that should be sufficient as an answer, Daniel folded the handkerchief and set it down. And what about you, Adjutant? What do you want to do once the war is over? It feels a bit unfair if only I do the talking. What she wanted to do, she hadn't really given it much thought. Lucy had lived a life of obedience to the Allied nations' commands. For someone like Lucy, who had long been bound to a life without free will, imagining the future wasn't an easy thing. However, having spent time with Daniel Steiner, she was able to harbor at least a small wish. If possible, I'd like to study baking more seriously. You want to learn baking? Yes. Do you have a particular reason for deciding on baking? If I had to give a reason. Following Daniel around to various dessert shops, Lucy had seen countless people. For Lucy, who had always only heard others, screams and resentment, the sight of people smiling and conversing in dessert shops felt like an entirely foreign world. Could desserts make people happy? If so, then Lucy wanted to properly learn how to make desserts, because she wanted to see people become happy from eating something she made. And, among those happy people, she hoped Daniel Steiner would be one of them. Thinking such thoughts, Lucy's face turned subtly red. I think it would suit me. Unable to tell the truth, Lucy mumbled evasively, and Daniel nodded in understanding. Indeed, you do have a natural talent for cooking. You'd likely be good at baking too. The meals you've prepared for me before were exceptional. Pretending to recall the flavor of Lucy's cooking with closed eyes, Daniel suddenly smiled. All right, then perhaps it's time I repaid the favor from back then. Daniel, opening his eyes softly, playfully reached under the table and pulled something out. It was a black box, neatly wrapped with a ribbon. Lucy, not knowing what was inside, blinked blankly. Brigadier General, this is. Upon reviewing your personal records, I saw that today is your birthday. As your direct superior, I couldn't possibly neglect my adjutant's birthday. Go ahead, open it. It wasn't actually her birthday. It was merely the one listed in her records, but Lucy didn't bother to say so. Daniel probably wasn't unaware of that either. Receiving her first ever birthday gift, Lucy nervously accepted the box. When she opened it, a somewhat rough-looking necklace was revealed. A polished amber gem served as the central stone. As Lucy silently gazed down at the necklace, Daniel spoke. I thought it would go well with your red eyes, so I bought it. You don't seem to care much about accessories, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to dress up once in a while. Lucy still didn't say anything. That silence, for some reason, made Daniel uncomfortable, and he gave a slight cough. If it's something you don't like, I apologize. Perhaps I should have prepared a different gift instead of a necklace. As Daniel tried to take the box back with a cautious glance, Lucy hurriedly pulled it into her arms. Well, she didn't hate it. As Daniel blinked in confusion, Lucy tightened her grip slightly around the box. I don't dislike it, rather it's the opposite. She was just so flustered by the situation that she didn't know what kind of expression to make. Blushing even more than before, Lucy averted her gaze and murmured softly, I will treasure it dearly. Though he couldn't be sure, Daniel felt that Lucy seemed pleased, so he nodded awkwardly. I'm glad to hear that. Still, it's getting late, isn't it? Shall we head out? Lucy would have liked to stay just a little longer if she could, but she couldn't find a proper reason to refuse. As she gave a small nod, Daniel raised his hand. A server came over and settled the bill. Daniel smiled at the server and pulled out his wallet to pay. The server, accepting the money, gave Daniel a polite nod and stepped back. Watching this, Lucy quietly opened her mouth. Brigadier General, I will make sure to repay the favor of you celebrating my birthday. This time, Daniel was the one caught off guard. Isn't it only natural to celebrate someone's birthday? It's not like we're strangers, we've known each other for over a year. But it was unreasonable to expect common sense from someone like Lucy, who had been a test subject. Not wanting to stir unnecessary trouble, Daniel stood with a smile. Then I'll look forward to the day you repay that favor, but for now. Checking the wall clock inside the shop, Daniel continued. I have another appointment, so I'll have to leave first. I ordered one more dessert, so stay and finish it before you go. An appointment, sir? Yes, it's a rather urgent one. I'm sorry. Lucy, looking up at Daniel, shook her head. Not at all. I'm grateful you made time for me at all. Thank you for understanding. I'll be going then. With that, Daniel turned and walked away. As she watched his retreating figure, Lucy was seized by a strange feeling. What Daniel just said. It was because, no matter how she looked at it, it had been a lie. After leaving the shop, Daniel arrived at a forest located on the outskirts of the city. It was a place so neglected that it didn't even have a visible path through the woods, making it difficult to pinpoint the exact location. But after paying close attention, Daniel was able to spot a shabby cabin nestled within the forest. According to the documents handed over by that businessman Hamthel, there was supposed to be a passage inside the cabin that led to the laboratory where the Lucy project had been conducted. Assuming there might be enemies inside, Daniel drew his revolver and slowly approached the cabin. Fortunately, he didn't sense any movement coming from within. Still, it wasn't a situation where he could afford to let his guard down. Peeking inside through the gap of the slightly open door, Daniel abruptly pushed it open and raised his revolver. He kept all his senses sharpened so he could immediately trigger his neural acceleration, but it proved unnecessary. No one. The cabin was completely empty. Only items like shovels and crowbars were hanging on the walls. At a glance, it's just an ordinary cabin. He couldn't understand where in this place the passage to the laboratory could possibly be hidden. Deciding to at least search for it, Daniel began packing around the cabin and soon felt something odd in a particular spot. There was a slight echo beneath his foot as he stepped on the floor. Suspecting something, Daniel pulled away the rug that had been covering the area and grabbed the crowbar hanging from the wall. As he pried up the wooden floorboards, a layer of metal plating beneath was revealed. This is it. Though a rusted padlock barred the entrance, it wasn't much of an obstacle. Daniel raised the crowbar and struck the padlock several times until it broke apart. After pushing the lock aside, Daniel knelt down, grabbed the edge of the metal hatch and pulled it open. Beneath, a staircase led downward, and along the wall were hastily affixed telephone lines and radio cables. Believing he had found the path to the laboratory, Daniel quietly steadied his breath. Now, it was time to uncover the full truth of the Lucy project. Chapter 203. Daniel, pulling out a flashlight from his pocket, pressed the power button, causing the light to fan out in a cone shape. The light was dim, giving off a somewhat dark feel, but there was no issue identifying objects. Taking a quiet, deep breath, Daniel descended the stairs. After some time, a narrow, deep corridor came into view. Shining the flashlight towards the end of the corridor, Daniel saw a steel door. He instinctively knew that this was the entrance to the laboratory, so he slowly advanced toward it. Even as he walked, Daniel kept his guard up, his eyes constantly scanning. The power's been cut off, so no lights are on, but there are light bulbs installed at regular intervals. If they cared about convenience, why make the corridor so narrow? The corridor was so tight that two people couldn't run side by side. As Daniel pondered the reason, he reached the steel door and was able to draw a conclusion. There are dried bloodstains on the wall. Judging by the pattern of the spattered blood, someone was shot here. That means... It seemed the straight corridor structure was intentionally designed to make it easier to deal with those trying to escape from the laboratory. Shaking his head in disbelief at the Allies' approach, Daniel turned off the flashlight and grabbed the door handle, pulling it. Creak! The steel door slowly creaked open. Preparing for any potential surprises, Daniel used the slight opening to peek inside, but there was no sign of anyone. After waiting for his eyes to adjust to the dark, Daniel pushed the door wide open and quickly scanned his surroundings. Confirming once again that there was no one, Daniel sighed in relief and switched on the flashlight. No one here. Did they abandon the laboratory? The laboratory, illuminated by the flashlight, was a complete mess. Glass ampoules, Syringes, microscopes, torn documents, and all kinds of glass bottles were scattered messily on the desk. Among them, the most noticeable was a cylindrical, vertically structured chamber. It looked like a glass tank large enough to hold a person, and beneath it, there were countless wires haphazardly connected. What the hell is this? He couldn't even begin to guess what such a bizarre thing was made for. After staring at the chamber for a while, Daniel turned his gaze to another area. Pausing for a moment, Daniel walked toward a section marked Subject Area. Upon entering, the old, musty smell made his senses more alert. Pulling out his handkerchief to cover his mouth and nose, Daniel carefully examined the interior. This place. He could see beds with leather straps for restraining the human body scattered here and there. Used syringes were carelessly lying on the floor beneath them. Clothes and shoes, presumably belonging to the test subjects, were discarded as well. Disgusting bastards. Thinking that Lucy had lived in such a place made Daniel's anger surge. Clenching his fists, Daniel quickly regained his composure. Calm down. The reason I'm here is to uncover the full story behind the Lucy project. Remembering his original purpose, Daniel found a room marked Record Storage within the subject area. Inside was a spacious room filled with dozens of shelves. As Daniel noticed the shelves packed with documents, he grabbed one at random to inspect. Experiment Log for Subject 37. The document labeled Experiment Log for Subject 37 had a large red stamp reading Discarded beneath it. Could it be that all the documents here are? These were the records of all the test subjects who had passed through the laboratory. Breathing heavily, Daniel continued to move around the record storage until he found a document labeled Subject 187. Carefully opening the document, a report appeared. Document number KZZFS13. Creation date April 11, 1932. Classification Top Secret. Subject information. Code name Subject 187. Place of birth unknown, presumed to be from the Empire. Gender age female 8 years old. Health status stable. Special notes. Mana response speed is the most exceptional among current subjects. 1932 This was about 13 years ago. They performed human experiments on a child who was only 8 years old. Daniel, feeling increasingly disturbed, flipped to the next page. May 15, 1932. Subject classified as superior, having raised no questions regarding the purpose of the experiment. June 17, 1932. Initial gene injections began with minimal biological rejection. Subject complained of headaches and occasional vomiting, though it was less severe than other subjects. July 10, 1932. Subject's verbal communication decreased noticeably, exhibited blind anger toward the researchers, though there was no cause for concern. Research continued, and subject became accustomed to the gene injections. August 7, 1932. Due to upper management's orders to deliver results, it was decided to use the subject's emotions for experimentation. Gene manifestation was found to be linked to anger and sadness. Experiment conducted by pairing subject 187 with subject 96, who was sociable, in an attempt to form an emotional connection. October 13, 1932. Subject 187 and subject 96 successfully formed a bond. Plans to dispose of subject 96 and provoke an emotional reaction from subject 187 when the time was right. November 21, 1932. Subject 187 began referring to subject 96 as a friend. Emotional bonding was considered complete, and subject 96 was disposed of. Upon learning this, Subject 187 was overcome with despair. Despair led to a burst of energy. Subject 187's retina glowed red as she screamed for the return of Subject 96. No physical rejection was observed, suggesting manifestation of the gene. November 22, 1932. Subject 187 caused an uproar during the gene injection process. Soldiers attempted to stop her, but were unsuccessful. 8 soldiers sacrificed their lives before the subject was restrained. The child displayed an unimaginable amount of strength and magic. It was concluded that the experiment was successful. The news was conveyed to upper management. Finally, is this the end of these dreadful days? The report ended with a hastily scribbled note at the end. After reading the report, Daniel's eyes remained calm, but an unknown emotion lingered within them. Holding his frustration in, Daniel paused for a moment before folding the report. He then fell into deep thought. If I calm down and think about it, there are many odd things. Why had the researchers kept these records without erasing them? Why was the steel door left open? Why hadn't the rusted padlock been replaced? His thoughts began to spiral, and eventually they came to a stop at one point. It's a trap. A trap meant to bind Daniel Steiner to this place. With that realization, Daniel's eyes narrowed sharply. At the same time, a squad in Allied military uniforms stormed into the laboratory. One of the squad members, Orem, who was moving silently, turned to look back and spoke. "Lieutenant, we're just the advance team here to report Daniel Steiner's location, aren't we?" Lieutenant Hamilton nodded. "We've already reported the location, haven't we? The main force will soon be launching a large-scale assault using Etherlium. What's the issue? Shouldn't the assault team be the ones handling Daniel Steiner? If we leave it to them, we won't get any credit. Do you know the value of Daniel Steiner's head? Are you saying that while you understand that, you all want medals, don't you?" At Hamilton's reply, Orem bit his lip. "He's a neural acceleration user, you know that, right?" "Yes, I know, but a neural acceleration ability isn't invincible, is it? Besides, we're the ones ambushing him. In all likelihood, he won't be able to use his ability properly when he's caught off guard, right?" Though Hamilton's words weren't wrong, Orem couldn't shake the feeling that they were being used as disposable pawns. With a deep sigh, Orem nodded. There was no need for an unnecessary argument since they would be entering the laboratory soon. Moments later, the squad entered through the open door of the laboratory, signaling to each other. "Two-man teams, search the area. Report immediately if you find Daniel Steiner or any unusual signs." Hearing Orem's command, the squad members nodded and scattered to different areas. Orem, along with one of his subordinates, entered the subject area. At the same time, Orem and his subordinate closed their mouths. The air was thick with a choking smell, and the traces of experiments felt ominously close. But soon, Orem regained his composure and signaled for the search to continue. He watched as his subordinate entered the records room and kept a watchful eye on the surroundings. It was then. Click! A loud crashing sound echoed, followed by the dying gasp of his subordinate. Panicked, Orem immediately rushed toward the records room. "Sebalat." He called his subordinate's name, but no answer came. Believing his subordinate had been attacked, Orem entered the records room and broke into a cold sweat. The faint light from a flashlight was spilling out from beyond a shelf, and the opposite door to the records room was open. Did Sebalat get killed and run through the other door? Nervously gripping his rifle, Orem cautiously moved toward the door, ready for Daniel to spring out from behind it. After moving to the farthest corner of the room, Orem found Sebalat, strangled and lying on the floor. The flashlight was lying nearby. As Orem concluded that it was definitely Daniel Steiner's doing, he grabbed his radio. Click. The coldness of metal touched the back of his neck. It was the muzzle of a revolver. Hadn't Daniel escaped through the records room door? As Orem stood frozen in panic, a chilling voice came from behind him. From the shoulder epaulet, "You're the squad leader, aren't you?" Daniel, stepping out from the darkness, spoke quietly. "If you don't want to die, you'll follow my orders from here on out." Chapter 204. Orem's breath stretched out slowly. Judging that resisting would not be a wise choice, he parted his lips. "What orders do you want me to follow?" "It's simple. Use your radio to gather the squad members at the center of the laboratory." Only then did Orem understand what Daniel was intending. He plans to eliminate the entire squad in one strike. Neural acceleration could grant overwhelming superiority for a brief moment, but it lacked endurance. According to existing records, the maximum duration of neural acceleration ever observed was only 8.7 seconds. Thus, Daniel was ordering the troops to cluster together in order to maximize the efficiency of his ability. As Orem hesitated, unable to bring himself to betray his comrades, Daniel spoke quietly. "Where's your hometown?" The sudden question caught him off guard, but Orem responded calmly. "A small village called Immgwc on the eastern coast of the Kingdom of Edria." "Did you live with your family?" "Yes. I grew up with my father, a fisherman, and my mother, who ran a flower shop. I have 2 younger sisters." "I see. Your family must be worried about you." The revolver barrel that had been pressed to his neck dropped away. "To return to your family, you'd best cooperate with me. Follow my orders, and I'll keep my promise not to kill you." Rather than telling him to betray his comrades for his own life, Daniel's "it for your family" held more weight. It was a line crafted to ease guilt, but Orem still hesitated. "Even if I return alive, my family won't be proud of me for betraying my comrades." "You think they'd be proud of your corpse instead?" Orem fell silent. After a short pause, a cold voice echoed from behind him. "You'd better decide quickly. We're not in a situation where I can afford to listen to your dithering." Daniel's words weren't a threat, they were the truth. To die here for his comrades, or to betray them and return home to his family. Weighing those 2 options, Orem, with trembling hands, picked up the radio. Taking a deep breath, he glanced back at Daniel and pressed the transmit button. "This is Squad Leader Orem. After the loss of 1 squad member, we've secured Daniel Steiner's position, so..." As he spoke, Orem came to a realization. "All personnel regroup at the center of the laboratory. Over." That the side of the scale holding his life weighed heavier than the one holding his comrades. The troops who heard Orem's radio gathered at the center of the laboratory. Relieved tension gave way to smiles of relief across their faces. "Guess we freaked out over nothing. So much for Daniel Steiner. Turns out he's not much. He's still human like us. Even if he has neural acceleration, he can't use it properly if he's caught off guard." Though, considering he managed to kill Sebalat even in that situation, he's still impressive. The soldiers, chatting amongst themselves, suddenly fell silent. Orem was walking out from the direction marked subject area. Behind Orem walked a man with his head lowered, presumably Daniel Steiner. The soldiers erupted in cheers at the sight. "Squad leader, you really did it." "Fuck yeah, we're all getting medals. Look at that, we caught the demon of the Empire." "Send the reporting quick, let them know we did." But their cheering didn't last long. They belatedly noticed Orem was unarmed. Squad leader." Orem bit his lip and began to sob. "I'm sorry." As he apologized, a grenade with its pin pulled was hurled toward the group of soldiers. As the troops stared blankly at the grenade, someone shouted in panic. Down. But it was too late. Boom! An explosion erupted, a deafening blast ripping through the air. As shrapnel from the grenade tore through the soldiers, screams echoed, and smoke and dust billowed thickly into the space. Aunt Ava's. Daniel shoved the despairing Orem aside, drew his revolver, and stepped forward. The soldiers who had been lucky enough to be outside the grenade's blast radius hurried to regain their senses and raised their rifles. Even some of those caught in the blast, their limbs still intact, crawled out of the smoke, gripping their rifles. 5 survivors. Before they could pull their triggers, Daniel activated neural acceleration. Mana condensed in his central nervous system, made the world appear in slow motion. Daniel raised his revolver and, one by one, aimed at their heads and pulled the trigger. By the time the neural acceleration ceased, and the world returned to its normal speed. Bang! 5 bullets fired almost simultaneously, bursting open the heads of the soldiers. The ones who hadn't even had time to pull their triggers collapsed to the floor, spraying blood. Daniel lowered the arm holding his revolver, believing it was over. As the dust gradually settled, 9 soldiers lay dead on the ground. As the blood flowing from their bodies began to pool, Orem, standing behind, let out a dry heave. Daniel, too, was startled by what he saw. 1 is missing. According to what he'd heard from Orem, a total of 12 personnel had entered the facility, including the commanding officer. That meant there should be 10 bodies here. Realizing something was wrong, Daniel quickly moved. Whiz! At that moment, a bullet grazed past his ear. Without a moment's hesitation, Daniel ducked behind one of the laboratory's pillars. Looking to the side, he saw Orem freeze in terror, eyes fixed on someone. And no, I didn't betray the Allied nations, I. Unfortunately, he didn't finish his sentence. Bang! With a gunshot, Orem's head exploded. So 1 really did survive. Apparently, someone hadn't trusted Orem's radio call and had hidden elsewhere on their own. As Daniel leaned against the wall, catching his breath, the sound of footsteps echoed. Daniel Steiner, so you bribed one of my subordinates and played dirty. Even in a corner, you still look for a way to survive, truly the mark of a great commander. The voice was relaxed. But wiping out 1 squad won't create a path to survival. The assault unit will soon take the city and descend on this location. Hearing that, Daniel opened his mouth. Assault unit. That's right. His Excellency the Count has launched a large-scale assault using Ethereum. The stated reason is to reclaim Fenbark, but the real objective is to kill you here and bury the truth. You're quite confident. If you fail to kill me here, you won't be able to bury anything. HMPH. I thought you were clever, but clearly you don't understand the situation. Even as we speak, the assault force is surrounding this place. A sneering laugh followed. Surely you don't think you'll escape through the encirclement. If you seriously believe that, I think you're in for a disappointment. He wasn't wrong. If Count Kalidra had launched a major assault using Ethereum, it wouldn't have been a half measure. No one had known the Allied nations had stockpiled enough Ethereum for such an operation, so no countermeasures had been prepared, an undeniable failure. As Daniel caught his breath, Hamilton continued speaking. By the way, how did you find out Lady Lucy was a former test subject? Coming here suggests you already knew a fair bit about her past. Possibly due to the aftereffects of neural acceleration, Daniel's hands continued trembling. Trying to buy time, Daniel answered the question. I knew from the beginning. You knew from the beginning, huh? I don't know how, but are you saying you stayed silent while knowing her background, just so you could use her? Think whatever you want. Hearing Daniel's reply, Hamilton chuckled as though amused. Ah, poor Lady Lucy, to be used like an object, by both the Empire and the Allied nations. What a pitiful life. While Hamilton was still speaking, Daniel activated neural acceleration and stepped out from behind the pillar. Judging from Hamilton's calm demeanor even among the corpses, Daniel assumed he had extensive combat experience, and so he accelerated again to ensure he could neutralize him. To steady his trembling hands, Daniel gripped his wrist and aimed at Hamilton. Hamilton was also aiming at Daniel, but it didn't matter. The temporal advantage belonged to Daniel. The problem was that the acceleration ended sooner than expected. Thinking of something, Hamilton's eyes trembled as Daniel appeared before him in the blink of an eye. Although his aim was off, Daniel couldn't afford to hesitate. He pulled the trigger. The muzzle flared and the bullet flew. But due to the off-target aim, the bullet struck Hamilton's pistol rather than his head. Clang! The impact sent Hamilton's pistol flying backward. In that moment, Hamilton snapped to his senses and kicked off the ground. Thud! The speed was almost inhuman. In an instant, Hamilton closed the distance and grabbed Daniel, toppling his balance. They fell to the ground nearly simultaneously, but Hamilton was the first to get back up. Climbing atop Daniel, Hamilton pressed his knee into his chest. Breathing heavily, he looked down at the now-restrained Daniel. "This is surprising. I didn't expect you to use neural acceleration twice in a row. That kind of stress on the body is no joke. What were you thinking?" With his chest crushed, even breathing was difficult. Just. Even on the brink of death, the will in Daniel's eyes didn't waver. "Because you kept spewing bullshit." Hearing that, Hamilton's expression turned cold. "So you don't want to die so easily, is that it?" Hamilton raised his right hand to beat Daniel to death, but didn't bring it down. He'd heard someone running from the direction of the laboratory's entrance. Turning his head naturally, Hamilton saw Lucy Amelia in an Imperial military uniform. Lucy, sprinting at full speed, pulled out her revolver the moment she saw Daniel and Hamilton. Seeing her, Hamilton lowered his hand and smiled. "Ah, Lady Lucy, long time no see, do you remember me?" Panting, Lucy seemed momentarily surprised to recognize him. "Hamilton." "Yes, it's me. His Excellency the Count specially sent me to bring you back. So how about you shoot this man and come with me to the Allied nations? And if you're feeling any guilt, don't. There's no need." Hamilton tugged at Daniel's tie. "This guy, he said he knew about your abilities from the beginning, which means he was trying to use why, Lady Lucy." Hamilton faltered. Because Lucy wasn't aiming at Daniel, she was aiming at him. Before he could even ask why, Lucy pulled the trigger. Bang! The bullet pierced through Hamilton's head. His body swayed for a moment, then collapsed on top of Daniel with a thud. After confirming Hamilton was dead, Lucy holstered her revolver and looked down at Daniel. "Are you all right, Brigadier General?" Pushing Hamilton's body aside, Daniel propped himself up with an arm and raised his upper body. Looking up at Lucy, Daniel couldn't help but smile. Lucy was wearing the amber inlaid necklace, the very birthday gift Daniel had given her earlier today. She said she'd repay the favor for remembering her birthday. He hadn't expected that to be today. "It suits you." Seeing Lucy look puzzled, Daniel, leaning against the pillar, chuckled softly. "I meant the necklace." Chapter 205. Meanwhile, at the central plaza of Fenbark. "Push forward, drive them out of the city. The Imperial commander is currently absent. That means they're just a rabble. Don't give them a chance to counterattack." As the Allied officers shouted, soldiers surged forward, flooding into the city streets. Each time a wave of soldiers exited the plaza, a new wave appeared, bathed in light. It was clear evidence that the Etherlium-based teleportation assault was being carried out actively. Regimental Commander Samp, who had been silently observing the scene, turned his head as light spread nearby. Moments later, as the glow faded, a middle-aged man with an ornate cane emerged. Facing the snake-like eyes, Samp instinctively bowed. "Count Kalidra, you've arrived." Kalidra said nothing in return. Instead, he closed his eyes and listened to the surrounding sounds. Even amidst the barrage of gunfire, the distant sounds of artillery rang out. Buildings crumbled, civilians screamed, but Kalidra paid it no mind. This was war. Such things were to be expected. Slowly opening his eyes, Kalidra fixed his gaze on Samp. "Report the battlefield status." Samp nodded once, suppressing his tension, and began to speak. "Yes, sir. Currently, our regiment and another are successfully securing the city. In addition, the absence of the enemy commander has caused the Imperial forces to lose morale and retreat. This has been confirmed at multiple points." The Imperial army had been caught off guard, unable to properly prepare for urban warfare due to the unexpected Etherlium assault. To repel an allied force that stormed the city in an instant was difficult enough, but with their commander missing, chaos must be at its peak. Chaos leads to operational failure and plummeting morale. Dealing with such a force was no different than beating down defenseless prey. And all of this had been orchestrated by Count Kalidra. He had given specific orders to the advance team. He sent ahead to report the exact moment Daniel Steiner entered the laboratory, so the assault could begin. Kalidra knew full well that Daniel Steiner choosing Fenbark, of all cities, was no coincidence. In order to plunge the Allied nations into ruin, Daniel Steiner would surely act to secure proof that Lucy Emilia had been a test subject. So the trap was set, and they simply waited. Waited for Daniel Steiner to walk into the cage drawn by the bait, the laboratory. He's a rat in a trap now. The encirclement is being established, I trust. Yes, sir, however, there is one issue. Samp hesitated for a moment, then spoke. We've lost contact with the advance team. It seems they entered the laboratory first and were overrun. One of Kalidra's brows twitched. That idiot Hamilton. He had entrusted command of the advance team to Hamilton out of appreciation for his loyalty, and the man had gone and done something foolish. Excessive loyalty ends up being poison. Kalidra bit down, suppressing his irritation, and exhaled sharply. The loss of the advance team changes nothing. Tighten the encirclement, don't let a single rat slip through. The target is Daniel Steiner. You are authorized to shoot on sight. Yes, sir, Count Kalidra. Gripping the handle of his cane, Kalidra clenched his fist. Despite the overwhelmingly favorable conditions, an inexplicable sense of unease loomed over him. Listening to the distant gunfire, Kalidra frowned slightly. If we fail to capture Daniel Steiner this time, there might never be another opportunity. The distant explosions echoing through the chaotic city also reached the laboratory. It's begun. Feeling faint tremors, Daniel leaned against the pillar and let out a shallow breath. Beside him, Lucy was wrapping a bandage around his arm. She had retrieved a first aid kit from the lab and was treating him. Yet to Daniel, Lucy's care felt meaningless. Maybe it's the side effect of using neural acceleration in succession. I can't summon any strength. It'll likely last for several hours. Even if he received treatment in this state, he would be helpless against the imminent enemy incursion. Lieutenant, that's enough. Daniel tried to stop her, but Lucy didn't comply. Despite it being only a minor injury from a fall, she wrapped the bandage with great care. Her gestures felt, to Daniel, like a denial of reality. You already know, don't you? If the assault is real, there's no way we survive. Count Kalidra surely came with far more troops than my brigade. The Imperial army is not incompetent. They'll hold out. Hearing the Imperial Army is not incompetent, come from Lucy made Daniel let out a dry laugh. You're right, they're not incompetent, but when a force without a commander faces a surprise assault, retreat is the proper move. The Imperial Army will retreat because they're competent. Brigadier General. With the Imperial Army in retreat, the Allied forces will quickly seize the city, and they'll encircle this place without resistance. No, maybe they've already finished the encirclement. Even breathing felt like a labor. As Daniel struggled, head bowed in silence, Lucy spoke softly. It doesn't matter if the Imperial Army has given up. Her hand tightened around the bandage. Because I haven't given up on you, Brigadier General, I will carry out my duty as your adjutant. So please, entrust yourself to me. That's an amusing thing to say. Are you planning to carry me on your back and break through the encirclement? If necessary, I will. Daniel let out a laugh through the pain at Lucy's firm tone. It was short and faint. You're wrong. Even if you carry me, breaking through the encirclement is uncertain. And even if you succeed, how will you shake off the pursuit? As you know, Brigadier General, I am a monster made in a laboratory, so I will manage somehow. You're not a monster, and if anyone hears that, they'll think you have no limits. Daniel closed his eyes, then slowly opened them again. If you were alone, it might be possible, but carrying someone like me on your back and trying to break through the encirclement, it won't work, especially if it's Count Kalidra himself leading the troops. That's why I said there's no way for us to survive. His fingers moved faintly. But still, forcing strength into his trembling hand, Daniel reached up and gently enclosed Lucy's hand. Lieutenant, you on your own can make it out alive. What are you talking about right now? There's something I want to show you. With his trembling hand, Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out a single document. It was a combustion-sealed paper, set to ignite upon exiting the laboratory. The presence of such a spell confirmed that it was top-secret material. He handed it over. Lucy took the document. Uncertain, she opened it, only for her eyes to go wide. It was about her. The truth she had always suspected. The moment it became certain that it wasn't the Empire, but the Allied nations, who had conducted the experiments. I'll apologize in advance for looking into your past without permission. Resting his head against the pillar, Daniel exhaled a shallow breath. And I also apologize for using you. Maybe what that man Hamilton said before he died wasn't entirely wrong. I turned you into an ally in order to create a more advantageous situation for survival. Lucy's hands trembled as she held the document. I deceived you from a long time ago. I acted like I didn't know anything, all while manipulating you. Perhaps this is the punishment I deserve. Daniel's eyes opened halfway. As an act of atonement, I want to put an end to the cycle of exploitation that has dominated your life. Lieutenant, no. His eyes, which had been slowly closing, opened fully again. Lucy Amelia. Lucy looked at Daniel upon hearing her name. In his gaze, there was an astonishing calm. There's no time. If you go now, you can still escape alone. Get out of here. Break through their encirclement. Go somewhere. Lucy knew what that look meant. It was the resignation often seen in someone who had accepted death. Go live your life in some peaceful village untouched by the fires of war. Become a baker. Live your life, not as someone to be used, but as yourself. Daniel Steiner had always sought survival. Born an orphan, having endured countless trials from slums to monastery, Daniel's worldview had naturally aligned with the rules of survival. But if he ever found himself in a situation where survival was truly impossible, he would not beg for his life in disgrace. And so, instead of pleading with his adjutant Lucy to save him, Daniel ordered her to leave. Because that, he believed, was the only way to atone for the life he'd lived, using others to survive. But Daniel Steiner had overlooked one thing. That was the heart Lucy had harbored all this time. I am not being used by you, Brigadier General. Lucy spoke, her voice firm and true. Wanting to save you, that's entirely my will. So please, don't insult me by suggesting you're using me. I will find a way to save you from here, no matter what. Tears gathered in Lucy's crimson eyes as she continued. Unrestrained, her voice rose with raw emotion. Even if you order me otherwise, Brigadier General. As if to cast aside the weight of her past, Lucy threw the document away. Seeing that, Daniel narrowed his eyes in quiet regret. But there's no way to break through this situation. There is. Lucy reached into her waist pouch and pulled out a processed crystal. Just like Daniel, Lucy too would sacrifice herself if it meant saving the other. Daniel, seeing the blue-tinged crystal, was stunned. That's a prototype Ethereum conversion stone I received from the Engineering Bureau before leaving the Allied Nations. I reported it as having been used at headquarters, so Count Kalidra won't know I still have it. As Lucy poured mana into the crystal, a sharp crack rang out and fractures began to form. Since it's a prototype, it's only good for one person, and the teleportation range is limited. But it should be enough to get you safely out of the city. So please, Brigadier General. Placing the crystal in Daniel's hand, Lucy continued. Please stay alive. At that moment, voices from not far off echoed through the laboratory. He's here, seal the entrance and send in the Special Operations troops. Move quickly. Once the entrance was sealed, even Lucy wouldn't be able to escape. They might never meet again after this day. But this was the best course. Brigadier General, being able to serve under you. As Daniel looked at her, unable to understand, Lucy gave him a faintly sorrowful smile. Was the greatest fortune of my life. Lucy's voice carried farewell. Daniel didn't like that. He clenched the Ethereum tightly in his hand. Lucy Emilia, wait for me here in Fenbark, I promise I'll take back the city and... The Allied Special Forces began pouring in. At the same time, the Ethereum shattered completely, and radiant light enveloped Daniel. I will. Ignoring everything else, Daniel looked only at Lucy and spoke. I will come for you. Chapter 206. Lucy, having sent Daniel away, rose to her feet and looked back at the Special Forces entering the lab. Seeing them raise their rifles, she surrendered after a brief moment of hesitation. She knew that struggling when the entrance was already sealed would only result in meaningless deaths. And having succeeded in saving Daniel, Lucy no longer had anything left to regret. Thanks to that, the Special Forces quickly secured her, but not one of them dared to lay a hand on her or speak with disrespect. For even if their relationship was built on lies, Lucy was still, at least on paper, the adopted daughter of Count Kalidra. As the Special Forces politely bound Lucy, the Allied forces succeeded in pushing the Imperial troops out of the city, and in the span of a single night, took control of Fenbark. This marked the first defeat of Daniel Steiner, and a victory for the Allied nations. The next morning, Fenbark, a mansion owned by House Kalidra. My lady, I am Namria's your assigned maid. May I come in? Lucy, leaning against the headboard inside the bedroom, gave no reply. Annoyed by the silence, Namria's knocked again. My lady, Count Kalidra wishes to see you today. He asked to meet you at noon, so we must begin preparing now. Still, Lucy said nothing. Convinced that this could not continue, Namria's opened the door and stepped inside. What she saw was Lucy staring blankly ahead, her eyes devoid of focus. It was hardly different from the expression she wore yesterday, when she'd been dragged here by the Special Forces. I felt the same when I was ordered to bathe her by Count Kalidra. She couldn't begin to guess what Lucy was thinking. She looked somehow sad. She felt a twinge of sympathy, but knew that clumsy consolation would do more harm than good. Deciding there was no need to meddle further, Namrias picked up the clothing basket and approached Lucy. "My lady, may I help you change? If you could just stand before the full-length mirror, I'll take care of the rest." Namrias kept her tone as cheerful as possible, but Lucy didn't so much as acknowledge her. Even so, perhaps deciding she couldn't ignore her forever, Lucy slowly got out of bed. She walked to the mirror just as Namrias had asked and came to a stop. Within the reflection, the amber necklace around her neck quietly asserted its presence. Watching Lucy for a moment, Namrias cleared her throat and stepped behind her. Setting down the basket, she began to chat lightly to ease the mood. "This might be a strange thing to say the first time we meet, but, my lady, you are absolutely stunning. Of everyone I've ever seen, you have the most graceful features. Have you heard that a lot?" Lucy started to reply, then stopped. She couldn't bring herself to utter the name Daniel here. That struck Namrias as a bit odd, but she didn't pry. Picking up a comb, she gently arranged Lucy's hair, then began to remove her nightgown with slow, practiced hands. Next, she dressed her in a white blouse and matching skirt, then brought over a small stool and placed it at Lucy's feet. "Would you please sit down? I'd like to help you with your stockings and shoes." Lucy gave a slight nod and sat. Smiling, Namrias took out a pair of silk stockings. Aligning them carefully with Lucy's toes, she began to draw the silk slowly upward. The soft fabric slid smoothly over her skin, covering all the way to her thighs. Ensuring no wrinkles had formed, Namrias gently smoothed out the material, then helped her into a pair of shoes. Once Lucy rose to her feet and faced the mirror, a refined young noblewoman stood in her place. By any standard, she now radiated the dignity befitting the daughter of a noble house. She's so naturally beautiful, anything suits her. Pleased with the result, Namrias impulsively opened a jewelry case she had brought in the basket. This might sting a little. Taking out a pair of earrings, she gently held Lucy's earlobe and inserted the pins. They dangled lightly once she let go. "Good, all that's left is the necklace." Just as she reached to unfasten the crude necklace around Lucy's neck. Lucy instinctively grabbed her wrist. Startled by Lucy's reaction, Namrias froze in place. For the first time, Lucy spoke. "Don't touch it." There was something in her voice that carried a faint, lethal edge, and Namrias broke into a cold sweat. Seeing her reaction in the mirror, Lucy recoiled in alarm and let go. "I'm sorry." Namrias looked down at her wrist. The grip had been so strong that a vivid red imprint was already rising on her skin. It stung enough to bring tears to her eyes, but realizing that Lucy hadn't meant her harm, she accepted the apology. "It's all right. It was my fault for trying to change your necklace without asking. Still, judging by how strongly you reacted, that necklace must be very precious to you." At the question, Lucy lifted a hand and gently touched the necklace. The craftsmanship wasn't particularly refined, and the design was nothing to speak of. It was the kind of necklace one could buy easily at any common jeweler. That was the extent of its material value. And yet, even if someone were to offer her a trove of rare and expensive jewelry, Lucy would never exchange it for the one she wore now. Yeah. Through this necklace, she could relive her memories of Daniel. As she recalled the moment when he'd given it to her, a faint smile touched Lucy's lips. "It was my first birthday present." Watching Lucy's reflection in the mirror, Namrias instinctively grew solemn. She couldn't say why, but the smile on Lucy's face was laced with sorrow. Meanwhile, the Imperial Brigade, having been driven to the outskirts of the city, had descended into extreme confusion. "We've succeeded in retreating, but the casualties are not insignificant," Total casualties number 713, of whom 320 are confirmed dead. Including those missing or taken prisoner, we've effectively lost nearly 20% of our fighting force. At the personnel officer's report, everyone inside the command tent fell into heavy silence. With defeat hanging thick in the air, the operations officer, who was also doubling as acting brigade commander, let out a sigh. It couldn't be helped. Who could have predicted the Allied forces would use Etherlium to launch a direct assault? And on top of that, we had to fight without the brigade commander. Given the overwhelmingly unfavorable conditions, losing only 20% of their forces in the retreat wasn't the worst outcome. And yet, the mood inside the command tent was as grim as if the entire brigade had been shattered. The reason was simple. There was no sign of their missing brigade commander returning. More than the defeat itself, what weighed on them most was the loss of Daniel Steiner. So much so that none of them had been able to bring themselves to report Daniel Steiner's status as missing to headquarters. So the brigade commander was captured by the enemy then. It was Phelps, the intelligence officer, who spoke. No one wanted to admit it, but with no word from Daniel Steiner since the collapse, the most likely explanation was that he had been taken by the enemy. Then what are we supposed to do? We can't keep fighting without the brigade commander. The operations officer clenched his jaw and exhaled low. The search is ongoing. If the gods have any mercy, they'll be on our side. But if the brigade commander truly has been discovered and killed by the enemy or taken prisoner. He paused for a moment before continuing. Then we retreat to the bridge and await orders from headquarters. So we're abandoning Fenbark. I don't know. From what I hear, it was the brigade commander who insisted on taking Fenbark in the first place, so the operation might well be called off. The thought of returning to the capital having lost both men and ground cast a shadow over the staff officers' faces. Phelps, the intelligence officer, was no exception. If the brigade commander were here, no one would be talking like a bunch of defeated men. The absence of Daniel Steiner had never felt heavier. Just then, urgent dispatch. A sergeant burst into the command tent. He saluted the assembled staff at the strategy table and spoke quickly. The brigade commander has been found in a clearing within the nearby forest and is on his way here now. Silence fell over the command tent. Phelps was the first to respond. Is that true? The sergeant nodded. Yes, sir. The brigade commander instructed that all staff remain at the command tent and await his arrival. If it were true that Daniel had survived, then there was no reason not to obey. The staff, hope returning to their faces, followed the order and waited inside the command tent. About an hour later, the sound of boots crunching outside reached their ears. And then, into the command tent stepped Daniel Steiner, his uniform torn in several places. He had bandages wrapped around one arm, an unfamiliar sight, but there was no doubt that it was him. The staff rose to their feet at once and greeted him with respect, yet none could bring themselves to say, "Welcome back." There was something about him, something more feral in his expression than usual. Since everyone is here, I'll be brief. His cold voice descended upon the command tent like frost. We are not abandoning Fenbark. The ones who will give it up will be the Allied nations. Daniel Steiner walked to the head of the strategy table. As the operations officer yielded the spot, Daniel took his natural place at its head. His fingers trembled faintly atop the table. So contact Central Command. Tell them that even though we've lost Fenbark, the operation need not be aborted, because Struggling to suppress his rage, Daniel recalled the final image of Lucy. We'll show Count Kalidra what real war looks like. Chapter 207. At noon, Lucy followed the maid Namria's as she was guided through the mansion. Count Kalidra had summoned her at the appointed time. "This way, my lady." The place Namrias brought her to was a courtyard garden nestled within the estate. Brilliant sunlight poured down as birds, brought to life by summer, chirped from the branches. It was an idyllic scene by all accounts, but Lucy felt nothing from it. If anything, it stirred a faint ripple of discomfort within her, as if someone had tossed a stone into still water. Count Kalidra, the man she had once called father, trusted, obeyed, was seated at the center of the garden, a table set before him. A strange impulse surged within Lucy, but she didn't show it outwardly. She clenched her fists, then released them, took a deep breath, and walked toward Kalidra. Sensing her presence, he looked up from the newspaper he had been reading. Though it had been ages since they'd last met, Kalidra folded the paper without so much as a flicker of emotion. "Sit." Lucy did as she was told. Seated, she saw the table was lavishly prepared with food. It must have been the work of a first-class chef. Each dish featured premium ingredients, and their glistening surfaces made it clear that they were seasoned to perfection. But she felt no hunger. As she stared at the food in silence, Kalidra set down his newspaper and picked up his utensils. "Eat, it was all prepared for you. You used to want food like this so badly when you were young. So you knew." A silence settled between them. Lucy, avoiding his gaze, parted her lips. "You knew that I liked food like this." She was asking why, if he'd known, he'd never once offered her any when she was a child. During all her time living with Count Kalidra, the only meals she'd been given were bland, unseasoned health foods. They were hardly different from the rations she'd eaten in the lab. Even on her birthdays, the meals never changed. So even when she shared the same table as Kalidra, she always ate something else entirely. As Lucy quietly laid bare that sorrow, Kalidra watched her, then picked up a knife and began cutting into the meat. "And now you complain about food. You should be old enough to understand by now. Everything was for your sake." Such a convenient excuse. Lucy let out a short, bitter breath before slowly raising her head. "Were the near-torturous experiments at the lab also for my sake?" Kalidra's hand froze mid-cut. He set his utensils down and met Lucy's gaze. In her crimson eyes, resentment shone more clearly than anything else. "So you saw it, or did Daniel Steiner tell you?" Now that Lucy knew the truth, there was no point in lying. "I admit it, that wasn't for your sake, it was for the Allied nations." "Then why didn't you just tell me the truth? Why did you lie all this time, making me believe the experiments were carried out by the Empire?" "I don't understand why you'd ask a question you already know the answer to. I didn't tell you the truth because I knew you wouldn't follow me if I did." Lucy's eyes widened. She hated him. She could never forgive him. And yet somewhere deep inside, she had still hoped that Kalidra might offer her a reason, an excuse. She had wanted to find even the tiniest sliver of possibility to forgive him. But the man standing before her now was trampling even that last fragment beneath his feet. "Lucy Emilia, do I look like a devil to you, or do I strike you as a hypocrite? I don't care how you feel. Good and evil are not clearly drawn in this world. I don't get my kicks from tormenting little girls, but this cruel world always forces my hand." There wasn't a trace of regret on Kalidra's face. "If it's confession you want, then fine, I'll confess. Objectively, I'm trash. I've committed unforgivable crimes, but even if I went back, I would make the same decisions, because I know those decisions were for the good of this country." As Lucy stared at him in disbelief, she suddenly rose from her seat. They. A heavy silence hung between them as Lucy looked down at Kalidra one last time, then turned and walked away. She had concluded that there was no point in continuing this conversation. Watching her retreating back, Khalidra raised a hand to his forehead. A dull ache pulsed behind his eyes. Perhaps, in his fury at learning Lucy had saved Daniel, he had spoken too harshly without realizing it. As he groaned softly with his eyes closed, someone approached. It was Colonel Samp, one of the commanders of the assault unit. He saluted. "Count Khalidra, as of this hour, we have fully retaken the target city of Fenbark. The estimated number of enemy dead is approximately 320, and we have secured 58 prisoners. Furthermore," Khalidra raised a hand to silence him. He exhaled slowly and cast a sharp glance at Samp. "Daniel Steiner, where is he?" The atmosphere chilled. Samp wiped the sweat from his brow and answered. "The search is being intensified, but we have not yet located him." "So he escaped. If we don't capture him, then what meaning is there in any of this?" As Khalidra clenched his jaw, Samp swallowed hard and spoke again. "My lord, I believe this operation was not without meaning. We've scored our first victory against Daniel Steiner, the so-called devil of the Empire. And I believe his defeated forces, seeing the difference in strength, will now truly consider abandoning Fenbark." At those words, Khalidra lifted his gaze. "Daniel Steiner, abandon Fenbark, don't be ridiculous." His eyes narrowed like a serpent, astonished at the suggestion. "He will come back without fail." At the same time, inside the brigade's command tent, an operations meeting was in full swing. "So what you're saying is," Phelps, the intelligence officer, spoke with a look of disbelief, "you intend to abandon the bridge?" The other officers wore similar expressions. But Daniel nodded with certainty. "They've succeeded in pushing us out of the city. Once they finish securing it, they'll almost certainly move to reclaim the bridge. Their morale is high and they have superior numbers. It's only natural they'll want to control a strategic point." He lifted his command baton and tapped the marked bridge on the operations map laid out across the table. "When they reach the bridge with their forces, they'll find the Imperial Army nowhere in sight. It'll appear as though we've abandoned the foothold and pulled back entirely. Now, what do you think the Allied command will assume? They'll believe the Imperial forces have retreated beyond the river. And would they pursue us? Unlikely. They'll still be wary of you, sir. Instead of advancing, they'll probably fortify positions near the bridge to prepare for a possible counterattack or ambush." The operations officer cut in, visibly anxious. "Brigade commander, if I understand correctly, you mean to abandon the bridge and pull back entirely?" "No," Daniel answered without hesitation. He shifted the baton and pointed to the northern forest region. "While they remain on edge, guarding against an Imperial force that isn't even there, we will be here." It was a classic deception operation. Plausible, though dangerously risky, thought the operations officer, who then voiced his concern. "It's not impossible, but we can't expect the Allied forces to remain on alert beyond the bridge forever. They're bound to deploy aerial reconnaissance. And once they realize there's no enemy presence beyond the bridge, won't they redeploy their units accordingly?" Indeed, once the Allies discovered that Daniel Steiner's brigade wasn't on the far side of the river, they would likely initiate wide-area reconnaissance. And if that happened, the forces hidden in the northern forests would almost certainly be exposed. But Daniel had already accounted for that. "I'll request support from Central Command. We'll ask them to set up inflatable tank decoys and camouflaged artillery positions in a forest 200 kilometers past the bridge. I've already marked areas that are easily spotted by air patrols. The enemy will discover this fake unit and turn back satisfied." The room stirred with murmurs as Daniel continued. "To further fool them, the fake unit will maintain continuous contact with headquarters. We'll use a frequency that's easy for the enemy to intercept. If the Allies catch that chatter, they'll believe it's real. He lowered the baton. In contrast, we will cut all communications and move independently into the northern forest. Once our forces are in position and preparations are complete, headquarters will then announce that reinforcements have arrived to support the decoy unit. Intercepting this, the Allies will likely conclude they need to strike Daniel Steiner's brigade before reinforcements consolidate. A large-scale force will then cross the bridge and launch a direct assault on what they believe is Daniel Steiner's actual position. That's when we destroy the floodgates upstream. The instant the gates are blown and the river floods, it will sever the enemy's path of retreat to the city. Even if they later realize the unit was fake, they'll be cut off. Fenbark, in turn, will become an undefended shell. Daniel Steiner planned to seize that precise moment, leading the entire brigade in a charge to reclaim Fenbark. The entire operation will be completed within 15 days. As the staff listened in awed silence, Daniel spoke softly. In 15 days. His eyes narrowed with a razor's edge. We will turn Fenbark, occupied by Count Kalidra, into hell. Chapter 208. As soon as Daniel issued his operational orders, the brigade moved swiftly. After contacting Central Command and receiving approval for the plan, they began night marches using intelligence extracted under torture from captured Defense Force soldiers, patrol routes, watch posts, observation networks, and more. They also knew the timing and flight paths of enemy aerial reconnaissance, which allowed Daniel's brigade to move safely through the forest for roughly 10 days, keeping their presence hidden. When morning came, as he did every day, Daniel ordered the unit to halt movement and begin covering all vehicles and tanks with camouflage netting. It was a tedious process, but it remained the most effective way to avoid detection. Pull the left side tight, I said. The left. Bring over more brush or branches to cover the net. Hurry. Triple layer the perimeter. Company 3, you're on outer watch. Everyone was shouting, but the volume was kept low. They were doing their best to ensure no sound leaked beyond the camp perimeter. Hearing the hushed activity, Daniel opened the armored vehicle door and stepped down. As he observed the soldiers moving briskly about, he heard footsteps approaching from behind. Turning around, he saw Phelp, the intelligence officer, and Freen, the brigade's medic. Seeing them bow their heads, Daniel spoke. "What is it?" They both lifted their heads. Phelp was the first to respond. "Brigadier General, according to intercepted communications, Allied forces are massing at the bridge fortifications. Just as you predicted, Count Kalidra appears to be preparing to strike the fake unit beyond the river." This was part of the limited communications window, only 10 minutes a day, used to avoid enemy interception, and the report had come through Phelp. Daniel nodded, but didn't show much satisfaction. Of course, Count Kalidra would be desperate to eliminate me. At this point, Kalidra wasn't pursuing Daniel Steiner merely because of the damage he had inflicted on Allied forces. It was because Daniel knew the truth, the secret of the laboratory. That truth had to be erased as soon as possible. If Daniel Steiner returned to the capital and exposed what he'd seen beneath Fenbark, it would be a political disaster for the Allied nations. So when he heard rumors I was preparing a counterattack, he probably took it as an opportunity. Desperation often clouds judgment. So determined to erase Daniel Steiner, Kalidra had pulled even the city's defense forces to the bridge. This was because he believed the intercepted communications from the decoy unit, which were designed to suggest that reinforcements from headquarters would soon arrive and launch a full-scale assault. On top of that, a few days ago, Central Command had gone one step further, scattering newspapers across the capital with the headline, "Daniel Steiner has not abandoned Fenbark." That must have been the Chief of General Staff's doing. I used to resent him for sending me to Fenbark, but From approving his request for support to orchestrating misinformation, they had supported him from behind the scenes. Daniel found himself feeling unexpectedly grateful. Though to be fair, if one traced everything back to its root cause, the Chief of General Staff was the one responsible for it all. With a faint scowl, Daniel pushed those thoughts aside and spoke. They've likely stopped paying attention to the floodgates. This is the right time. Deploy the infiltration team and have them wait at the dam. Understood. I'll select fast-moving personnel and issue the orders. Phelps bowed and turned away. As Daniel watched him go, Freen stepped a little closer. Brigadier General. With her clear voice, Freen held up a thermos flask in her hands. When Daniel looked at her, she smiled bashfully and opened the lid, pouring the contents into the cap. Here. She handed the cap to Daniel. Take a sip. Surprised, Daniel accepted it and sniffed. This isn't chicory coffee, and it's not canned. Did you carry the grounds yourself and brew it? Yes, I heard you liked real coffee, sir. In wartime, a proper cup of coffee was a rare luxury. As the aroma reached him, Daniel took a sip and let out a quiet breath. It tastes even better after so long, thank you. If you're thankful, then treat me to a meal sometime. Not at the command mess, at an actual restaurant, something nice. All right, that's not too much to ask. I'll even get you your favorite mint ice cream. That sounds great, and maybe with Captain Lucy. Freen's voice trailed off as she mentioned Lucy. Awkwardness lingered between them. Freen turned her gaze away. She's doing all right in Fenbark, right? I hope nothing happened. She's fine, just like you said. Daniel turned his eyes in the direction of Fenbark. Lucy's a strong woman. Rain was falling on Fenbark. Lucy Emilia noticed it first. Since her confinement, she had done nothing but sit in her room and stare out the window. The raindrops carried by the wind struck the glass at an angle. One by one, they merged and began sliding down the window pane in long streaks. Lucy sat there for an hour, watching the rain in silence, until her fingers twitched involuntarily. She'd heard voices on the other side of the door, soldiers talking. Is it already time to switch shifts? I thought I'd die of boredom. You did good. Go have a smoke or something. Yeah, I will. Hey, did you hear? Hear what? The Count pulled the city's defense troops to the bridge. Lucy's half-lidded eyes opened slowly. Yeah, I heard. That's why troops are moving out of the city right now. Guess we're lucky we got assigned to the mansion detail. For sure. If we hadn't, we'd be headed to the bridge right now like everyone else. But what's the sudden need to mass troops at the bridge? I don't know. Seems like they're finally gonna deal with Daniel Steiner. Lucy sucked in a sharp breath. Assuming she was asleep, the soldiers kept talking. Daniel Steiner, how? I don't know the details, but intel says they intercepted communications from his unit. So they've located him. Must have, otherwise they wouldn't be mobilizing troops like this. That's good news. The great Daniel Steiner finally about to die at the Count's hands. At that, Lucy shot to her feet. Huh, did you hear that? Sounded like a chair falling over. Lucy stormed to the door and flung it open. The startled soldiers stared at her. My lady, weren't you asleep? Lucy stared at them, fists clenched, and moved her lips. Moved. As if to say, no further words were needed. While working in the mansion's office, Count Kalidra froze. The telephone, normally silent, had begun to ring loudly. Wondering what could have prompted it, he picked up the receiver, only to be met with a panicked voice. See, Count Kalidra, this is Sergeant Tora, assigned to the mansion's security detail. Lady Lucy has left her room and is headed to your office. We tried to stop her, but she's completely unrelenting. Kalidra hung up before the sentence was finished. Sensing danger, he judged that he had to leave the office immediately and rose to his feet too late. Footsteps were already pounding down the hallway. Bang! The office door slammed open as Lucy appeared. She was breathing heavily, and from the look of her, it was clear she had overwhelmed the guards stationed throughout the mansion to get here. Kalidra stared at her with a blank expression, but his mind was racing through countless worst-case scenarios. Lucy was, in essence, a living weapon. If she had come here with the intent to kill him, there was no one who could stop her. And Kalidra knew that, so he held his breath. In the long, tense silence, Lucy slowly began to walk forward. At the same time, Kalidra instinctively took a step back. Not knowing what she would do next, the tension reached a fever pitch. But instead of attacking, Lucy slowly knelt down. Count Kalidra. Her breath still ragged, Lucy continued. I have never once asked anything of you. No matter what task you assigned me, I carried it out without complaint. You know this. Then Lucy placed a hand over her heart. So please, I beg you, do not kill Daniel Steiner. Her voice trembled as the words left her lips. It was the first time. Never before had Lucy Emilia pleaded with such humility. To Kalidra, who had only ever known her as a cold, emotionless puppet, it was an unfamiliar sight. When he gave no answer, merely watching her in silence, Lucy placed both hands on the floor. And slowly she bowed her head. Your Excellency, even if you declared that you would control every part of my life from this moment on, I would accept it. Her silver-white hair slid down her shoulders, falling to the floor. Even if you locked me away in a dark room, never again to see the light, I would obey. Tears began to pool in Lucy's crimson irises. So please. Lucy remembered. Test subject number 96, who had smiled so innocently at her. The maid her age, who had told her of the world outside the mansion. And the man who had shown her that life wasn't just pain. Brigadier General Daniel Steiner is the most precious person in the world to me. A single teardrop slipped from her eye and soaked into the floor. With a quiet sob, Lucy bowed her head until her forehead touched the ground. I beg you, please. Eyes closed, her voice carried her desperate plea. Don't take anything else from me that I hold dear. It was the frail, powerless cry of the woman who held the most terrifying strength in the world. Chapter 209. 3 days later. Under Count Kalidra's orders, the two regiments and the city's defense forces gathered at the bridge launched their offensive. The armored vehicles of the armored regiment were the first to cross, rumbling noisily, followed by the infantry regiment and the defense forces, maintaining their formations as they advanced. Despite the low hum of engines and the otherwise quiet atmosphere, confidence was evident on the soldiers' faces. This was because, with assistance from the Intelligence Bureau, they held an informational advantage in this operation. Colonel Samp, who had taken up the role of acting divisional commander as the senior officer, felt much the same as his troops. Based on the Imperial transmissions we intercepted 3 days ago, Daniel Steiner's brigade was most certainly stationed beyond the river. Furthermore, intel had come in that the Imperial General Staff had dispatched a new armored force to support Daniel Steiner's brigade. In addition, after multiple reconnaissance sorties, a formation of armored fortifications had been spotted approximately 200 kilometers past the bridge, and photographs had been secured showing numerous tank silhouettes. Having suffered losses in Fenbark, they're probably digging in and building defensive lines. Just as Count Kalidra had said, launching an offensive now was the most appropriate course of action. Striking first before the wolf named Daniel Steiner could grow his fangs, and annihilating his brigade was the right move. How arrogant, to not retreat and to even dare attempt another attack on Fenbark. Whether he was desperately trying to shake off the humiliation of his first defeat, or whether he actually believed he could retake Fenbark, Samp couldn't tell. Either way, it was a pitiful ploy. If it were me, I'd have accepted defeat and returned quietly to the capital. Your arrogance will be your downfall. Even a hero who had won countless battles could fall to a single misstep. To Samp, Daniel's current judgment was clearly a mistake, an irrecoverable gamble. He must have assumed we wouldn't go on the offensive. It was clear he thought they would be too preoccupied defending Fenbark to move their forces. But Count Kaladra had ordered the assault immediately after intercepting the Imperial communication. Samp, honored to be at the front of that offensive, was more than satisfied. I'll kill the devil of the Empire with my own hands. By killing the Empire's devil, he would gain fame and bring a decisive victory to the allied nations. Marching the army forward with such conviction, Samp received shocking news on the second night. What did you just say? Frozen in place, Samp stared at the urgent report handed over by the intelligence officer. As silence fell across the command tent, the intelligence officer, crushed by the atmosphere, opened his mouth. According to the recon unit's report, all the tanks were empty. They appear to be inflatable decoy tanks. Samp wasn't the only one caught off guard. As murmurs spread among the assembled staff in the command tent, Samp's voice trembled as he continued questioning. Impossible. You expect me to believe that nonsense. Then what about the artillery positions? What about the photographs we collected from aerial reconnaissance? The intelligence officer lowered his head and responded. The recon units also inspected the areas beneath the camouflage nets believed to be artillery positions, but all they found were piles of rocks. Some of the structures were boxes shaped to resemble artillery pieces. Unable to continue the report, the officer bit his lip hard. As a heavy silence sank over the room, Samp blinked several times, as if denying reality, then spoke. The communications. What about the Imperial transmissions we intercepted? What the hell were those? The transmissions themselves were definitely from the Imperial command network. The frequencies were reused repeatedly and matched the Imperial Army's past patterns. The RF fingerprints were a match, and the call signs referred directly to Daniel Steiner's brigade. Then why? The intelligence officer exhaled deeply and raised his head. With a face full of despair, he delivered the final blow. Division Commander, sir. We were deceived by their feint. All the transmissions we'd been hearing were just cut off at once, like they no longer needed to fool us anymore. Seeing the officer on the verge of tears, Samp felt a pounding headache. Daniel Steiner played us for fools. Was the bridge crossing, the intercepted transmissions, was all of it orchestrated by Daniel Steiner? The realization came too late. But there was still a chance. Snapping back to his senses, Samp slammed his hand on the command desk and shouted, "Reverse course. Turn back immediately. Daniel Steiner must be targeting Fenbark while it's empty. We cannot give him the opportunity. Push the light tank battalion ahead. We must reach Fenbark before he does, no matter what." The intelligence officer couldn't shake the feeling that the division commander was now moving exactly as Daniel Steiner had intended. But he couldn't voice that thought, because there was no other option left. Meanwhile, Daniel Steiner's brigade had completed preparations to move out from the forest and onto the plains. There was no longer any need to remain hidden. Vehicle mechanics, check the intake systems again. Not a single defect is acceptable. Finish warming the engines and check all ammunition. No duds are to be allowed. Comrades, the hour of reckoning is upon us. It's time to pay back the humiliation we suffered in Fenbark. On the eve of the offensive, energy began to surge throughout the brigade. Morale was high, and it was only natural since the enemy was now moving precisely according to Daniel Steiner's plan. As the soldiers let out shouts from all directions, Daniel was in the command tent with his staff, conducting the final review of the operation. As you all know, once Count Kalidra confirms our brigade's advance, he'll request reinforcements immediately. As the de facto leader of the Allied nations, they'll respond swiftly. Shall we request support from Central Command? No, if we request support from Central, it'll take too long for anything to reach us. If I were Count Kalidra, I'd send an emergency call to the local city defense forces. Daniel's words earned a nod from the operations officer. In that case, they'll most likely use the railway to bring in reinforcements. It's the fastest option. And also the most dangerous. Relay the orders to the light armor unit. As soon as we begin the advance, they are to cut off the northern freight station and intercept the reinforcements the moment the train arrives. Understood. The operations officer responded solemnly and looked back down at the map. If Count Kalidra is defeated in this battle and loses Fenbark, it'll be quite the spectacle. There'll be serious backlash inside the Allied nations for the reckless use of etherlium. He wasn't wrong. They had expended a massive quantity of etherlium, one of the most vital strategic resources, and if they still failed to kill Daniel Steiner and lost Fenbark on top of that, it would deal a significant blow to Count Kalidra's standing as the leader of the Allied nations. But now was not the time to indulge in self-satisfaction. Don't grow complacent. We have no way of knowing what the enemy might be hiding up their sleeve. At Daniel's warning, the operations officer gave a shallow bow. It was not an incorrect assessment. As the officers continued exchanging opinions, a liaison officer entered through the entrance of the command tent. "Brigadier General, I've come to report." Daniel returned his salute, and the liaison opened his mouth to speak. At approximately 05:10 this morning, aerial reconnaissance confirmed that the enemy's 2-regiment vanguard has withdrawn from their forward positions. Judging by how they're securing retreat paths, there's a high probability they're reversing course. They must have seen the decoy units with their own eyes. They figured it out faster than expected. Daniel let out a low chuckle. Too late, though. He stifled the laugh and raised his head from the operations map. Relay the message to the forces infiltrating the sluice gates. They're to re-establish communication with the recon unit and general staff. The moment the enemy attempts to cross the bridge, the sluice is to be detonated. Yes, sir. The liaison officer responded crisply and gave a firm salute. Daniel returned it, and the officer exited the tent. Left alone with his staff, Daniel reached out for his service cap resting atop the command table. Now that all preparations are complete, it's time for a show of force. You'll recall what I said, that I intended to turn Fenbark, currently occupied by Count Kalidra, into a living hell. With a practiced motion, Daniel placed the cap upon his head. Beneath its visor, his eyes glinted with a refined, simmering fury. The time has come. If they called Daniel Steiner a devil, then he had every intention of giving them reason to believe it. Pass the order to all units. Under the gaze of his officers, Daniel shouted without a shred of hesitation. Advance on Fenbark. Chapter 210. T plus 12 hours since the start of Operation Daniel Steiner. Temporary field command post, established inside the estate of Count Kalidra. How could this happen? How was Daniel Steiner's brigade spotted in the north? Didn't aerial reconnaissance report that he had established defensive positions 200 kilometers west? That was Daniel Steiner's scheme. He apparently anticipated that the Allied forces would rely on aerial recon and constructed a fortified position using inflatable tanks and crates. Because aerial reconnaissance couldn't provide clear identification, they had blindly believed it. Amidst the growing confusion, one of the staff officers finally spoke up, sounding exasperated. "What about the regiment and defense forces we sent across the bridge? Tell them to hasten their retreat. When the hell are they expected to arrive in Fenbark? I've already issued orders to move the troops as fast as possible. By now, the vanguard should have reached the bridge, so perhaps even before Daniel Steiner's brigade." While the staff were still exchanging opinions, a liaison officer burst into the room. Panting heavily, the liaison immediately spotted Kalidra seated at the head of the table, his forehead in his hand. After a salute, the liaison quickly opened his mouth. "Urgent report, the sluice gate. The sluice gate has been destroyed." At the mention of the sluice gate being destroyed, the staff froze. Because those words could mean only one thing. One of our armored battalions was submerged mid-crossing when the sluice was blown. The divisional commander ordered an emergency withdrawal, preventing further losses, but the liaison clenched his fist tightly. "Crossing is impossible. Due to the recent heavy rains, the destruction of the sluice has caused the river to flood massively. Radio reports estimate that crossing will be impossible for at least 4 days." At the word 4 days, Kalidra exhaled sharply and the staff stirred. "Did I hear that right? 4 days? This is absurd. Daniel Steiner's brigade will reach us before we can even pull back. What about the defense force? How many defenders are still in the city?" Defeat was beginning to show on the officers' faces. It was clear to everyone that if things continued like this, Daniel Steiner would seize the city. Amid the despair, Count Kalidra clenched his teeth. Daniel Steiner. Only now did he realize that he had lost the psychological war and had been completely played by Daniel Steiner. Rage surged and his breathing grew uneven. Watching him closely, the chief of staff carefully spoke up. "Your Excellency, Count, at this rate it's only a matter of time before Daniel Steiner takes Fenbark. For your safety, I recommend abandoning the city, even now." Kalidra turned only his eyes to glare at the chief of staff. The sheer pressure of that gaze made the officer instinctively lower his head, and Kalidra turned his attention forward once more. "You're telling me to hand this city over to that man?" It was humiliating, but there was no other option. Kalidra, gripping his cane tightly, looked down at the ring on his hand. Inside the clear gem embedded in the ring, a strange energy was constantly churning. This was the only control stone capable of neutralizing Lucy Emilia. It had been created by order of Count Kalidra through scientists when Lucy successfully manifested her talents and turned into a monster, essentially a safety measure. It was also one of the reasons Lucy had obediently remained inside the mansion, without resistance. Its mechanism was simple. The moment magic power was infused into the control stone, the gem would shatter, and its energy would violently erupt in all directions. It had no effect on ordinary people, but this energy, extracted based on the gene agents administered to the test subjects, would collide with Lucy's magic and trigger an intense backlash. Unable to withstand the backlash, Lucy would lose consciousness on the spot. However, it wasn't a perfect solution. According to the scientists, once the control stone was used, Lucy's body would develop an immunity, making a second attempt impossible. In short, this was the first and last chance to neutralize Lucy Emilia. Still deep in thought, Kalidra finally planted his cane firmly and rose from his seat. "One city is enough to give up to that bastard. Chief of Staff, you're coming with me." "Understood." The chief of staff had an ominous feeling he couldn't shake, but bound by duty and unable to refuse, he rose from his seat and followed Kalidra. Inside the mansion's bedroom, Lucy sat by the window, gazing outside as always. Next to her, Namria's was peeling fruit, but she couldn't hide the anxiety on her face as she glanced at Lucy. Should she say something or stay silent? After watching Lucy carefully for a moment, Namria's finally gathered her courage and spoke up. Young lady, something feels off. Since morning, high-ranking officials have been pouring into the estate, and then they all went into that big room with grim faces and I heard shouting. Lucy didn't respond. It wasn't something she could answer. Couldn't it be that something went wrong on the front lines, that the enemy, maybe won? Namria's shut her mouth the moment she realized what she'd said. Even if she sympathized with Lucy, she had been born and raised in the Allied nations. So it was only natural that she didn't view Daniel Steiner's rise in a favorable light. But Lucy, who had a certain relationship with Daniel, would surely feel the opposite. As Namria's fell silent, Lucy gave a faint smile. There's no need to worry. Even if the brigade commander is here to retake the city, he won't attack civilians. Really, I heard Imperial soldiers are devils who rape women at will. That's just rumors. Of course, such soldiers might exist, but at the very least the brigade commander's troops don't do that. I can guarantee it. Hearing Lucy speak so firmly, Namria's felt something within her settle, just as she was about to exhale in relief. Into footsteps. Multiple sets of them echoed from the hallway. Lucy's eyes narrowed as she immediately realized these weren't soldiers coming for a routine shift change. There was only one person who would come leading armed men at this point. Count Kalidra. He must have determined the war situation had turned against him and was now here to play his next move. From his perspective, there was no way he'd want to hand over Lucy, an asymmetric military asset, to Daniel Steiner. If I refuse whatever offer he makes, he'd use the control stone. Knowing, at least in theory, the power of the control stone, Lucy could only stay on edge. If Count Kalidra used the control stone, that meant one thing: disposal. If she wanted to survive, the logical move would be to obey. But she didn't want to go back to that wretched past, because there had been a man who had shown her that this world wasn't just pain. After a deep breath, Lucy reached her hand toward Namria's. Namria's, hand that to me. The fruit knife, why? There's no time to explain, quickly. Hesitating, Namria's ultimately chose to trust Lucy and passed over the fruit knife. Lucy tucked the knife into her sleeve and moved her lips silently. Namria's, I'm sorry. Bang. The door slammed open, and Count Kalidra entered, accompanied by his chief of staff and soldiers. See, Count. Ignoring Namria's entirely, Kalidra stepped inside and planted his cane against the floor. Lucy, Emilia, it's time to return home. Despite Kalidra's words, Lucy remained calm, still gazing out the window. That irritated him. After a short silence, Kalidra spoke again. Are you saying you won't go back? The brigade commander told me to wait in Fenbark. At his signal, the soldiers raised their rifles at Lucy. Namria's panicked and asked what this was about, but Kalidra didn't spare her a glance. I will give you one last chance. Stand up and come with me. But Lucy didn't move. You know it too, Count. Her voice was low but resolute as it spread through the room. That there is no longer a future where I follow you. As she spoke, Lucy watched Kalidra's reflection in the window. She saw his hand move toward the control stone on his ring. If possible, This was her chance. In that brief moment of carelessness, Lucy accelerated her nerves. In a flash, she sprang to her feet, drew the fruit knife, and hurled it at Kalidra. Almost simultaneously, the chief of staff jumped in the way. Your Excellency! Thunk, the knife embedded itself deep in the man's arm. How? was the chief of staff, also someone with nerve acceleration. There was no time to dwell. In the next instant, the control stone absorbed mana and shattered, sending a violent shockwave through the room. Desperately, Lucy tried to push through the wind and move. The moment the wind touched her skin, a searing pain exploded across her body and her vision flickered. Despite her will, her body collapsed to one knee, and Namria's rushed to support her. "Young lady, are you all right?" She had no strength left in her limbs. Panting, Lucy barely managed to lift her head and meet Kalidra's eyes. He did not avoid her gaze. "So this is your answer." The chief of staff groaned with the knife still in his arm, but Kalidra and Lucy simply stared at one another. "You will regret this insolence for the rest of your life." In a voice devoid of warmth, Kalidra continued coldly. "Chief of staff, assemble the personnel, take Lucy Emilia back to the lab." That initial talk of going home had merely been to test her. In truth, if everything had gone to plan, Lucy was to be killed here once she was neutralized. That was the most efficient way to eliminate all future threats. But perhaps because he had once raised her as an adopted daughter. Or maybe because of all the time and money invested. Kalidra couldn't bring himself to do it. So he chose a different method. Inform the relevant personnel. Use the chamber in the lab to erase all of Lucy Emilia's memories. Just like they had erased her memories of Fenbark in the past. He hadn't wanted to touch her mind again, but as far as he was concerned, there was no other choice now. "Make it quick." Turning his eyes away from Lucy, Kalidra gave the chief of staff a sharp look. "We must finish everything before Daniel Steiner arrives." There was no time. If anything goes even slightly wrong, everything would be lost to Daniel Steiner. Chapter 211. T plus 28 hours since the start of the operation. Daniel Steiner's brigade, advancing rapidly along the road beside the railway and across the plains, was able to enter the city with speed. A small contingent of defense forces attempted resistance during the entry, but they were of little concern. The moment they took cover in the city's buildings to launch an attack, they became targets for the tanks. Boom! A superheated shell fired from the barrel blew an entire building to pieces. Even before the debris from the explosion hit the ground, the screams of Allied soldiers followed. A few soldiers managed to survive the shelling by sheer luck, but they had no time to feel relieved. Behind the lead tanks, the brigade's troops were flooding in like a swarm of hornets. The only options available to the defense forces were to die fighting or raise the white flag and surrender. A few remaining tanks that had stayed behind to defend the city attempted to respond to Daniel's brigade, but it was a losing battle. The Allied tanks struggled to penetrate the Empire's armor, whereas the Empire's tanks simply turned the Allied tanks into fireballs. The firepower disparity was overwhelming. Enemy tank unit confirmed destroyed. We've secured a clear path for armored unit advance. Proceeding to the next objective. Inside an armored vehicle, Daniel pressed the transmit button on the radio as he listened to his brigade's progress. Tank units, link up with infantry support and swiftly secure the city center. Then move to secure key positions and transport routes. A reply of acknowledgement came from the other end. As the sound of artillery echoed around him, Daniel, reassured by the smooth progress of the city occupation, couldn't help but think of the lab. The ominous machinery set up in that place flashed in his mind. If Lucy's headaches in Fenbark were related to that device, Count Kalidra might be trying to use it on Lucy again. Thinking he needed to eliminate that variable, Daniel picked up the radio and pressed the transmit button again. "Recon Company, follow me immediately. We're moving to the outskirts of the city." The research lab, which was usually cloaked in darkness, was now flooded with light. Thanks to Count Collidra's orders, massive electrical power had been supplied to the facility. Most of the power was being concentrated into a vertical chamber at the center of the lab. Inside the chamber, Lucy floated weightlessly, like suspended in zero gravity, unconscious. Watching her silently, the squad leader glanced toward the research staff. "Hey, how much longer do we have to wait?" With news that Daniel Steiner's brigade had entered the city, they had to evacuate this place as soon as possible. But the lead scientist merely looked troubled. The electromagnetic field generator is functioning properly. It's generating a resonant electromagnetic field to stimulate the hippocampal region and block neural synapse transmissions. So, what the hell are you saying? Speak plainly. To put it simply, the memory erasure isn't working. The subject appears to be resisting. We've never encountered an error like this before. As the scientist stared at the control panel, unable to hide his dismay, the squad leader scowled. "Fuck, are you saying you can or you can't do it?" "As I said, this is an unprecedented error. There is one possible solution, but it's too dangerous. Honestly, it'd be best to abandon the process." Before he could finish, a scream echoed from above. The soldiers and the squad leader immediately drew their weapons. Amid their tense silence, the sound of multiple troops sprinting down the hallway reached them. At the squad leader's gesture, a soldier hesitantly peeked around the corner. Bang! The soldier's head exploded on the spot. As the terrified researchers scrambled for cover behind the control panel, the squad leader gritted his teeth. "Fucking hell!" Pointing his pistol down the corridor, he waited. Imperial scouts surged in moments later. As the Allied soldiers began firing in a panic, the lab was soon filled with the sound of gunfire. But the louder the gunfire grew, the more Allied soldiers dropped. Pouring in through the corridor, the Imperial scouts gunned down the defenders one by one as they advanced. Even the squad leader, returning fire with his pistol, was struck in the shoulder and collapsed to the floor. He gasped for air, having dropped his pistol, as a uniformed officer stepped in from the hallway. The officer's chest was covered in decorations, someone the squad leader recognized very well. Daniel Steiner. Hearing the muttered name, Daniel turned his head. The squad leader clawed at the floor, trying desperately to reach his fallen pistol. But Daniel was faster. He drew his revolver. Bang! The bullet struck square between the eyes. The squad leader bowed his head and accepted death. Confirming that the lab had been secured, Daniel stepped forward, boots pressing into the blood of the fallen Allied soldiers. His steps gradually slowed as he reached the chamber containing Lucy. He stood for a moment, staring at Lucy suspended in the chamber, then slowly turned to the side. The scientist, catching Daniel's eye, felt a crushing pressure and shakily stood up. It felt like Daniel was silently demanding it. "Speak." The flat voice echoed quietly through the lab. "Why is my adjutant inside that chamber?" The scientist lowered his head, fear gripping him. "Please forgive me. I was only following Count Collidra's orders. I wanted to refuse, but he was holding my family hostage. I had no choice." "What were the orders?" "He commanded me to erase the young lady's memories. I only did as I was ordered." The scientist trailed off, falling silent. Because Daniel's gaze was now bearing down on him like a force of pure violence. "Has my adjutant's memory been erased?" His voice, low and heavy, carried a distinct killing intent. Like a herbivore sensing a predator's roar, the doctor hurriedly opened his mouth. "That's not it. The moment we touched a specific code to begin memory erasure, the young lady's consciousness mounted a strong resistance. That triggered a critical error, which caused the magnetic ring inside the chamber to surge in output." The doctor raised a trembling hand to adjust his glasses. As you can see, the young lady is currently in a coma. At the word coma, Daniel clenched his teeth. He closed his eyes for a moment, suppressing his emotions as best he could, then stepped forward toward the control panel. Passing the doctor, Daniel stared at the console's screen, filled with red windows, all displaying the word error. Examining the display, Daniel opened his mouth. This specific code showing up on the panel, what does it mean? The doctor hesitated briefly before answering. To put it simply, it pertains to Brigadier General Daniel Steiner. Daniel let out a low breath. It was absurd. To avoid forgetting, she had pushed herself into a coma. After a long silence, Daniel finally spoke again. From this point forward, I will tell you all your future. He looked around at the terrified researchers, including the doctor. Tell me how to bring my adjutant out of this coma. If no one here has an answer, you'll all die in this place. The moment Daniel finished speaking, the scouts raised their rifles and took aim at the research staff. Panic swept the room as the doctor frantically blurted out, "There is a way, a possible one at least." Daniel turned a sharp gaze on him. Drenched in cold sweat, the doctor forced himself to continue speaking. The young lady is currently in a form of consciousness withdrawal to avoid external interference. Simply put, she has locked away her most important memories so even she cannot access them, and then relocated her consciousness into her past. He gestured toward the control panel. Right now, the young lady is trapped in the memories of her childhood. In theory, if we can make contact with her consciousness and help her recall those locked memories, she should be able to awaken from the coma. The problem is, lifting his head cautiously, the doctor looked Daniel in the eye. The person most suited for that role is Brigadier General Daniel Steiner himself. Of course, the memories Lucy was trying to protect were all about Daniel Steiner. Therefore, the quickest way was for the man himself to make contact. Having understood the explanation, Daniel asked another question. How long will it take? Excuse me. Inside we can't say how much time will pass, but in reality it should only be a matter of minutes. However, since this isn't a fully verified procedure, there will be some risks. Fine, then prepare it immediately. The doctor's face went blank, as if stunned he had agreed so readily. A brigade commander. Nearby, the company commander who had been listening and also intervened in shock. This is too dangerous. Is it really worth the risk? It is. The answer came instantly. Daniel's eyes rested on Lucy, still floating in the chamber. This woman risked her life to save mine. A wry smile tugged at his lips. So what would I be if I ran away because I was afraid to do the same? Seeing him like that, the company commander lowered his head to show his understanding. The doctor, thinking he might have found a way to survive, immediately began preparing, as if to prove he hadn't lied. We'll need a simplified chamber for consciousness contact. Please help move it. Daniel watched as a few soldiers assisted the doctor, then walked closer to the central chamber. He stopped at close range, staring at Lucy floating within. Around her neck, she still wore the necklace with the amber gem. Such a hopeless adjutant, making your superior go through all this. With a faint, low laugh, Daniel raised his hand. Lucy, I know it's hard, but hang in there just a little longer. His hand, rising like something caught in a net, finally touched the glass wall that encased her. Just like you saved me. Daniel mouthed the words with genuine feeling. I will save you too. Chapter 212. With the help of the soldiers, the doctor was able to retrieve the auxiliary chamber from another sector. Once the auxiliary chamber was placed next to the central chamber where Lucy was housed, the researchers approached it. At the doctor's gestured instructions and brief orders, the researchers nodded and moved quickly. Their hands worked fast, connecting the wiring before one of them raised his hand. Neural interface connected. Please begin monitoring. The doctor nodded and pressed a few buttons on the control panel. Confirmed, synchronization complete, reporting stable connection. Having finished the synchronization, the doctor turned to Daniel. Brigadier General Daniel Steiner, preparation is complete. Daniel, who had been staring at Lucy, gave a slight nod and walked toward the auxiliary chamber. Stopping in front of it, he quietly spoke. So I just go in here? Yes. Once you're inside, I'll activate the auxiliary chamber to place both of your consciousnesses in a shared state. That will allow you to naturally enter the young lady's consciousness. But there are precautions you must keep in mind. Precautions? The doctor raised a hand to adjust the position of his glasses. Yes, as I mentioned earlier, the young lady is currently in a state of mental withdrawal. If you try to forcibly restore her memories, she'll reject it. After a short pause to think of an example, the doctor continued. For instance, directly saying the name Daniel Steiner or confronting her with, "Why don't you remember me?" Those would provoke resistance. You're saying I have to make her recall it on her own, naturally. Correct. That's also why I said we don't know how much time will pass inside her mind, even if only minutes pass in reality. In the worst-case scenario, Daniel could become trapped inside Lucy Emilia's consciousness. That was the doctor's warning, but Daniel didn't care. It doesn't matter. He had already steeled himself. Because I've made up my mind to save this foolish woman, no matter how long it takes. As Daniel shrugged off his officer's coat, a soldier stepped forward to receive it. And doctor, Daniel handed the coat to the soldier as he spoke. Fenbark will soon belong to me. You know what that means. It was a warning not to try anything foolish, because now, not only the doctor's life but his family's as well were in Daniel's hands. Understanding the implication immediately, the doctor lowered his head in fear. I will take full responsibility and do my utmost. Hearing the response, Daniel handed over his revolver as well and stepped into the auxiliary chamber. Taking his position inside, Daniel took a deep breath before speaking. Begin. The doctor nodded and operated the panel. The chamber's door closed, and the magnetic rings began spinning rapidly. After a short wait, Daniel's consciousness began to blur as his body slowly floated upward. The noise of the spinning magnetic rings began to sound like a comforting lullaby. And as it did, Daniel slowly closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the first thing Daniel saw was light pouring in through a window. Antique decorations stood along the hallway like ornaments, gleaming in the sunlight. Looks like someone's mansion. As he stared blankly at the sight, voices drifted from nearby. Did you hear? That girl Melly got attacked by a thief and died. What, Melly? Wasn't she the young lady Lucy's personal maid? They called her a maid, but I heard they were practically friends. Still, it's terrifying. Don't you think something going on with the young lady? Ever since she was adopted by the Count, there have been all sorts of accidents in just 1 year. Turning his head, Daniel spotted a group of mansion staff gathered and gossiping. And he was among them. Looking down at his neat clothes, Daniel realized he had entered Lucy's consciousness in the form of a servant. I'm seriously scared these days. That guy Malton got hurt, too. Barely lasted 2 months before injuring his leg serving the young lady. Wouldn't even say how it happened. I shouldn't say this, but doesn't it feel like she brings misfortune? Her red eyes give me the chills whenever we make eye contact. Totally agree. With Melly gone, one of us will have to attend the young lady now. I'm worried the Count will assign me, aren't you? The last remark was directed at Daniel. Having figured out his status, Daniel responded with a faint smile. Not at all. I consider serving the young lady to be an honor." Half of that was sincerity. One of the maids looked at him strangely, then chuckled. "Well, that's perfect then. We'll let the Count know that you want to be her attendant." Sensing an opportunity, the others added in their own support. "That's right, you'd be the perfect fit. This kind of thing should go to someone who actually wants it, don't you think? Awa, our little one's so thoughtful. Thank you for volunteering." With unanimous agreement, the decision was passed on to Count Khalidra. He didn't care much who served Lucy, so he accepted the recommendation, and Daniel naturally became her attendant. Though calling it an attendant was a stretch, his main job was to bring meals to her room. The problem was, even that simple task wasn't easy. "Young lady, I'm the one newly assigned to serve you. May I come in?" Though he had come to deliver her meal, Lucy gave no permission to enter. Despite knocking several times and requesting entry, there was only silence. Normally, one would just leave the food outside and go, but Daniel didn't. Worried, he opened the door and stepped inside. "Young lady, I don't know what's going on, but you must eat." Daniel trailed off mid-sentence. Lucy, sitting on the edge of the bed, looked worse than he'd expected. In her childhood form, her body was small and clearly emaciated at a glance. Her long, silver-white hair was dry and rough. Her red eyes were lifeless. Her gaze drifted aimlessly, as if she'd already given up on the world. Her eyelids, puffy from how long she'd cried, still bore clear streaks of tears. After a moment of silence, Daniel set the meal tray down on the floor and slowly approached her. Kneeling before her, Daniel looked up at her face and spoke. "Why are you so disheartened? Do you perhaps believe that Melly's death is your fault?" Lucy didn't respond. But there was no need. Her eyes reacted to the name Melly, and fresh tears welled up. When she blinked, a tear rolled down her cheek in a single line. Unable to watch any longer, Daniel pulled out a handkerchief and gently wiped her eyes. "If the other servants have been spreading nonsense, please ignore them. Let me tell you the truth, none of this is your fault." As he spoke, Lucy clenched her teeth. Then suddenly, she slapped his hand away and began to sob. "Young lady." He wanted to comfort the young Lucy more, but any more interference would likely backfire. So Daniel instead placed the handkerchief in her hand, rose without a word and left the room, hopping for a next time. But even the next day, things hadn't improved. Lucy lay unmoving on the bed, and the meal he'd brought remained untouched, just as he'd left it the day before. Heart aching, Daniel replaced the meal and murmured softly, "You can't go on like this. Even Melly wouldn't want you to starve." And then, thunk, a small doll flew at him and hit his chest. Lifting his head, he saw Lucy glaring at him with ragged breath. Her eyes, sharp and fierce, practically shouted, "Get out." Daniel was a little taken aback, but he remained composed, calmly picked up the doll, placed it on the table, and bowed before leaving the room. Then the next day, Daniel entered to deliver her meal and noticed something different. Though Lucy still lay motionless on the bed, the soup on the tray had been partially eaten. Perhaps she had taken a few bites while retrieving her doll from the table. A small thing, but for Daniel it was a positive sign. Rather than rushing to restore her memories, Daniel wanted to see her regain her strength first, and so he acted. From that day on, he began sneaking desserts from the kitchen, or even making them himself to include with her meals. This is a dessert called parfait. You see the layers of ice cream, cookies, fruit, and chocolate syrup in this glass. I promise it's impossible for it to taste bad. Appetizing descriptions were included free of charge. Lucy didn't react at first, but Daniel was not one to give up. "Today's dessert is an eclair. You can have it after finishing your meal. This little guy is so soft and sweet, it's addictive after a single bite. Don't you want to try it? And so a month passed. Young lady, you must try this. I went through great trouble to sneak it from the head chef. Curious what dessert it is. Behold mint chip ice cream, a refined, luxurious flavor. Then 2 months. It's not Christmas, but there's no law saying you can only eat Stollen on Christmas. Can you see the powdered, sugar-covered beauty tempting you? Take a slice. You'll taste heaven. By the 3rd month, Lucy had begun to regain her energy. Her dry silver-white hair regained its luster. Her colorless red eyes began to glow again. Though she still gave him the cold shoulder, never speaking to him, that was fine. The important thing was that she was getting better. Well then, I'll be taking my leave for now. Daniel turned to exit, thinking so. Adieu. The unfamiliar voice of young Lucy stopped him in his tracks. Sitting at the table after getting down from the bed, she mumbled without looking at him. Come sit, eat the Stollen with me. Frozen, unsure if he'd heard correctly, he remained motionless, until she added in a whisper, That's an order. It was the moment when the firmly shut door to her heart finally began to open. Chapter 213. Daniel couldn't refuse. After all, it was an order, so he sat down at the table. Lucy was deliberately avoiding eye contact, but it didn't matter. Daniel sliced the Stollen into small pieces and placed them on Lucy's plate. Each time, Lucy accepted the piece without a word, like a hatchling being fed. After a few repetitions, tears began to gather at the corners of her eyes. Young lady. Worried she might have choked from eating too fast, Daniel poured her a glass of water and held it out, but Lucy didn't take it. Left holding the cup in silence, Daniel remained still. Only after Lucy swallowed did she speak. Why are you being kind to me? What do you want? The question caught him off guard. It was blunt enough to stop him from answering. I heard you volunteered to be my attendant. Are you stupid? Daniel set the glass down. Lucy went on. Do you even know who I am? Why the Count took me in as his adopted daughter? You don't know anything, do you? That's how it looks, so let me make it clear, even if you get close to me. What does that have to do with anything? Lucy flinched. Her shoulders trembled as if she might cry. When she slowly lifted her head, Daniel let out a quiet breath. It seems you want me to ask, so I will. Was what happened in the past your fault? And if I find out, do you want me to hate you for it? After a short silence, Lucy shook her head. Then that's enough. No matter what kind of past you carry, I'll treat you the same. And to be frank, you're overestimating yourself. This isn't kindness. Daniel leaned in slightly, a faint smile on his face. This is just how I treat people normally. If I ever truly tried to be kind to you, young lady, you wouldn't be able to handle it. You'd fall for me completely, so I suggest you stay cautious. Lucy's eyes widened at the absurdity of it. What the hell? The word slipped out with a short, startled laugh. So you really are an idiot. She raised a hand and wiped the corners of her eyes. Thanks to Daniel, Lucy was able to release at least part of what had been weighing down her chest. She took a deep breath and opened her mouth again. Hey, I don't usually ask this kind of thing, but... She hesitated, visibly nervous. Then, gathering herself, she looked at him. What's your name? That was quick. Daniel considered giving her a false name. He couldn't reveal the real one, but paused. Even if this was only a world inside her memories, he didn't want to lie to her. After a brief moment of thought, he recalled something that fit. Sio Dayun. A name from his past life, one no one here would know. That's my name. It was the only name he could give her truthfully, without disrupting the world she was in. After exchanging names, Lucy and Daniel grew close rather quickly. Considering Lucy had been shunned even by the mansion's servants, it was only natural that she would feel drawn to someone who took her side. And so came summer. Even in a season where vivid flowers flaunted their full bloom, the two spent their time happily indoors. "Hey, once I leave this mansion, there's a lot I want to do." Lucy suddenly spoke up while working on a crossword puzzle from a newspaper Daniel had brought. Curious about what she might want to do, Daniel looked up from the puzzle and leaned back in his chair. "Things you want to do, ma'am. Can you be more specific?" "First, I want to see the sea. Melly told me there's a salt lake that stretches out endlessly, and after that, yeah, I want to raise a dog." "A dog? That sounds nice. I used to have one myself." "Really? What was it like?" Seeing Lucy's eyes light up felt strange, but also reassuring. To think she used to express her emotions so freely. It made him feel all the more regretful that, by the time she had grown up, she wore such a blank expression, likely the result of being isolated in this mansion. Even if this world was nothing more than a memory, seeing Lucy with life in her eyes was enough to put him at ease. Daniel smiled faintly as he answered. "She was a very sweet creature. Just watching her gave me strength. Holding her felt like I had the whole world in my arms. When I called her name, Kelly, she'd perk up her ears and come running. I can still see it clearly." Lucy's face went a little blank as she listened. "Kelly, that name sounds familiar somehow." Daniel grew serious as well. If this led Lucy to regaining her memory, then she might be able to return to the real world. "Ahem. You can do it," Daniel thought, silently cheering her on, but Lucy only shrugged. "Not sure. Maybe there was a servant with a similar name." "I see." It seemed the name Kelly wasn't enough to trigger her memory. Unfortunate, but there was nothing he could do. Still unwilling to give up, Daniel offered a story in passing. "Actually, that name reminds me of something. There was a woman I used to know. She heard me mention Kelly once and thought she was my lover. I remember being completely flustered." "Huh? She mistook Kelly for your lover?" Lucy blinked, clearly confused, and then stifled a quiet giggle behind her hand. Whoever that was, she was an idiot. How do you mix up a dog and a person? That's just common sense. I'd never make that mistake." Daniel bit his tongue. He'd nearly said that was you in the future. Yes, of course. Our young lady would never mistake a dog for a human, but still. Daniel glanced over at her. She had a ribbon tied in her hair, and was dressed in a long-sleeved blouse that covered her arms and a skirt that fell to her ankles. The fabric was of fine quality, but the way she insisted on wearing the same type of outfit every day had made Daniel wonder. "Summer coming. Wouldn't something lighter be more comfortable? You'll overheat if you keep wearing that." "I'm fine." "Even so, I'm sure there are plenty of outfits that would suit you better." "I said I'm fine." The firmness in her tone left no room for further comment. Figuring she had her reasons, Daniel nodded silently. That was when someone knocked at the door. "Young lady, it's time for your private swordsmanship lesson. The Count asked that you not be late." Lucy took a deep breath before replying. "All right, I'll be there shortly." She stood up. "You should go back now." The tone was unexpectedly cold. Daniel stood as well and offered a polite nod. "I'll see you at dinner then." With that, he opened the door and stepped outside. And yet a strange unease lingered. "I'm sure I saw it." Just for a moment, Lucy's expression had clouded. Evening came. Daniel brought her dinner, but it was a wasted trip. "Young lady." Lucy, who should have been in her room, was nowhere to be seen. Normally, he would have left the tray on the table and walked away, but something felt off. There was no hesitation. He acted quickly. Worried about Lucy, Daniel ran straight to the basement of the mansion, where her swordsmanship lessons took place. He descended the stairs and passed through the dim corridor. At the end of it, a brightly lit open area came into view. Servants were gathered around, watching. On the raised platform stood two figures holding wooden swords. Daniel recognized them both immediately. The one panting heavily, clutching her sword with all her strength, was Lucy. The man facing her calmly was Lieutenant Hamilton. Lieutenant Hamilton. There was no mistaking him. They had crossed blades at the research lab, a face impossible to forget. So he's Lucy's instructor. Now it made sense why Hamilton had acted like he knew her back then. Still, whether instructor was the right word for him was questionable. Even though Lucy could barely stay on her feet, Hamilton hadn't called off the lesson. "What are you doing just standing there? Don't tell me you're already tired." Hamilton scratched his neck as if annoyed. "They told me this one had potential, guess not." He muttered it under his breath, but Daniel heard him clearly. And if he heard it, Lucy surely did too. Hamilton was pushing her on purpose. "Come on now. If you keep this up, it's going to be hard for me to report anything positive to the Count." Lucy's hands trembled as she gripped her sword. She had clearly taken a beating. Her clothes were covered in dust and dirt. I'm trying." She barely managed to force the words out, but Hamilton just clicked his tongue. Trying isn't enough. Results matter. At this point, it'd be better if you just took your beatings and built up your endurance. He rolled his shoulders and stepped toward her. Lucy backed away with each step, but Hamilton moved faster. Without even thinking, Daniel launched forward. Hamilton, not expecting interference, raised his wooden sword. "Come on, young lady. This time I'll go with a rapid series. You'd better block them properly." He lifted his sword high and brought it down. Crack! But it never reached Lucy. Daniel stepped between them, stopping the blade with his forearm. "What the hell are you?" Hamilton stopped mid-sentence. Daniel was staring at him like he intended to kill. The pressure in his gaze made Hamilton freeze. Daniel growled low. "You'd better watch yourself." His eyes narrowed, sharp and furious. "Unless you're eager to die again." Chapter 214. Cold sweat beaded on Hamilton's forehead as he stepped back. A shiver had crept over him without his realizing. He rubbed his neck and opened his mouth. "Have we met before? Is that really what matters right now?" It wasn't an unreasonable question. After an awkward pause, Hamilton frowned with one eyebrow. "Look, I don't know who you are, but I'm here under the Count's orders to teach the young lady swordsmanship. So if you don't mind, how about stepping aside instead of interfering?" "Swordsmanship, you say?" Daniel let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You're calling it swordsmanship, beating on a 10-year-old child. If you're proud enough to call that education, you must have been raised the same way." The smirk vanished from Hamilton's face. "I don't know what kind of gutter you crawled out of, but you'd better watch your mouth. If you're not careful, I might end up teaching you some swordsmanship." "I appreciate that. I've actually been feeling the urge to beat you senseless." "Oh, I thought you were just gutsy, but you're actually out of your mind. You really want to go up against me?" Daniel nodded and turned to look behind him. "Young lady, please hand me a practice sword." But Lucy shook her head. She knew. She knew just how cruel the man called Hamilton really was. If Daniel lost, he might get beaten to the brink of death. She couldn't allow that. "No, if something happens to you, won't you trust me?" Daniel's voice was warm. Lucy flinched and raised her head. He gave her a gentle smile. "I won't betray your trust." The way he said it made it hard not to believe him. After a moment of hesitation, Lucy finally held out the wooden sword. Daniel accepted it, bowed his head slightly in thanks, and turned around. Hamilton looked at him with a mix of disbelief and disdain. "You seriously want to fight me? You're just a servant." "Do I look like I'm joking?" "You're out of your damn mind. Well, whatever." Hamilton rolled his shoulders and took a few steps back. "You're the one who picked this fight. I'm sure the Count will understand. I'm about to turn you into a cripple, so don't hold a grudge." He planted his back foot. He meant to lunge forward in one explosive burst, throwing the weight of his body behind the strike. Daniel, who knew Hamilton from their past fight, took a deep breath and gripped the wooden sword tightly. Hamilton knows how to control physical enhancement freely. If this drags on, I'll be at a disadvantage. That means. It had to be over quickly. The moment Hamilton sprang off the ground, Daniel activated neural acceleration. Within the slowed world, he could see Hamilton suspended in the air. He could clearly trace the path of the wooden sword as it began to swing down. I could stop him right now, but if he did, they might accuse him of using something other than swordsmanship, of relying on his neural acceleration. I need to make it look like a clean win, using only technique. As soon as that thought finished, Daniel released the acceleration. The sword came down. But, whoosh! Daniel, who had already seen the path of the strike, dodged easily and moved into position. Hamilton's eyes darted in confusion. Wham! Daniel struck him hard in the side, exploiting the opening. Hamilton staggered. He blocked my attack, how? Before he could finish the thought, Daniel's next strike followed. Gritting his teeth, Hamilton raised his sword to defend himself. Crack! The wooden swords collided with a dull thud. Unbalanced, Hamilton tried to force Daniel back with sheer strength. What? Daniel spun smoothly, his blade angling toward Hamilton's neck. Hamilton jerked backward to avoid being hit, but lost his balance in the process. Daniel didn't miss the moment. He swept his leg under Hamilton's feet. Thud! Hamilton hit the ground hard, dropping his sword. GH! Groaning, he lifted his head and gasped. Daniel stood over him, calm and composed, looking down as if from a great height. You talk about swordsmanship with this level of skill. I get lost, unless you do want to end up a cripple. Grinding his teeth in frustration, Hamilton pushed himself to his feet. He glared at Daniel, unable to accept losing to a mere servant, but he didn't come at him again. He'd realized the difference in skill. Eventually, Hamilton turned and left the sparring ground. The servants who had been watching nearby hesitated, then followed after him. Left alone with Lucy, Daniel let out a low breath. That was close. If Hamilton had pressed the fight, Daniel couldn't have guaranteed victory. Still, he was relieved things had gone well, until Lucy suddenly shouted. You idiot! Idiot, he turned stunned. Lucy was standing there, teeth clenched tight. You're an idiot, aren't you? A real total idiot. What are you even going to do now? What are you referring to, ma'am? Are you seriously asking? If the Count hears what just happened, you could be in danger. Her words were harsh, but Lucy was worried about him. Daniel wasn't unaware of what exactly she was concerned about, but it didn't matter. It wasn't as if he'd acted without a plan. Young lady, if it suits his goals, the Count would use a monkey as an instructor. So don't worry. Once he hears about what happened today, I'll be more likely to be hired as your swordsmanship teacher than dismissed. Daniel's calm reasoning left Lucy uncertain, her expression somewhere between doubt and hope. Looking down at her, Daniel's face shifted into something a little colder. And the fool here isn't me, it's you, young lady. That bastard Hamilton was beating you. Why didn't you ask anyone for help? It wasn't until he saw Hamilton strike her with his own eyes that Daniel understood. Why Lucy insisted on wearing long sleeves and ankle-length skirts, even in the height of summer. She didn't want me to see the bruises. She'd been trying not to worry him. That was why she wore those clothes. To Daniel, it was simply unbearable. You could have at least told one of the servants. if you just said that Hamilton was using violence." He stopped mid-sentence. He remembered the way the servants had passively watched Hamilton's so-called lessons earlier that day. "Don't tell me no one." What followed was a low, sickened realization, and then pity. "No one ever acknowledged your pain, did they?" Lucy kept her eyes down, silent. She had probably cried out when the lessons first began, had probably begged them not to hit her, to stop. But all she'd ever seen were servants with cold, indifferent faces. No matter how much she pleaded, all she got in return was apathy, silence, neglect. So Lucy had given up. She had come to accept that this world was built on pain. Daniel, who understood that now, dropped to one knee. "Young lady, others might ignore your voice, but I never will. So if anything troubles you in the future, please come to me." Lucy gave a faint nod, then suddenly stepped forward and hugged him. Daniel didn't ask what the gesture meant. He could feel her small shoulders trembling. So he raised a hand and gently stroked her back, as if to soothe the wound she'd carried until now, if only a little. As expected, once Count Caladra heard what had happened at the training ground, he appointed Daniel as Lucy's new swordsmanship instructor. Now both her attendant and her teacher, Daniel carried out his role faithfully. He looked after Lucy closely, guiding her with care, not violence. And slowly, day by day, Lucy began to smile more. Daniel didn't know when she would regain her memories, but he was content. He hoped more than anything that she could let go of the pain in her heart. But life always has a way of sending trouble when least expected. You're seriously reporting that she still hasn't awakened any new abilities, and you think that's worth saying out loud. It had been about 6 months since Daniel had become Lucy's instructor. He overheard Count Caladra speaking in the garden with one of his subordinates. Curious, Daniel hid behind a pillar in the corridor, straining to hear. "Then there's no helping it. I can't allow any trace of the human experimentation to remain. At dawn tomorrow, dispose of Lucy Amelia." And in that moment, Daniel understood. The timeline of this world had changed. Chapter 215. The moment he heard it, Daniel ran straight to the room where Lucy was staying. As he moved, he thought, why had Count Caladra suddenly decided to dispose of Lucy? He asked himself the question, and didn't take long to find the answer. Because of me. In this reconstructed world of memory, the only foreign element was Daniel Steiner. If he had never infiltrated this place, Lucy would never have been marked for disposal. Everything I did, thinking it was for her sake. In the end, it had led her to death. Gripped by the need to take responsibility, Daniel rushed up the stairs and down the hall. He ignored the servants who tried to stop him, and finally reached Lucy's room. He took a deep breath, then opened the door without knocking. "Olé!" Lucy made a strange noise as she hurriedly hid something behind her back. She was blushing, as if caught doing something embarrassing. "Don't get the wrong idea, okay? That doll, I just made it because I was bored, not because I was thinking about you or anything." Lucy's excuse trailed off, sweat forming on her forehead. It was because Daniel was looking at her with a dead serious expression. What's wrong? How could he even begin to explain this? Controlling his breathing, Daniel thought hard, then stepped toward her. "Young lady, you said you wanted to see the sea, didn't you?" He knelt on one knee in front of her, then held out his hand. "I believe now is the perfect time. Would you come with me to see the ocean?" The sea all of a sudden. "There's no time. You have to decide right now." Daniel's raised voice startled her for a moment, but then she understood. "If not today, I'll never get the chance again." Her voice trembled. Daniel nodded. Only then did Lucy fully understand. She reached out and took his hand. I'll go, let's go see the sea. With Lucy in his arms, Daniel didn't hesitate. He fled the mansion immediately. There hadn't been nearly enough time to form a plan. All he could think was that he had to get Lucy away from that hellish place. But of course, Count Kalidra wasn't the kind of man to sit still and watch. The moment he heard Daniel had escaped with Lucy, he gave the order to his private troops. Find them both, kill them on sight. And now, Daniel was being hunted by the Count's soldiers. He can't have gotten far. Sweep the area, search every inch. Permission to open fire. I repeat, open fire has been authorized. The Count said we are to shoot to kill, load live rounds. Close the net, force him to show himself. The voices of the soldiers echoed all around. Daniel crouched behind a dead tree, catching his breath. No matter where he looked, the area was crawling with troops. Torchlight and flashlights lit up the forest in every direction. There was nowhere to run. Damn it! Grinding his teeth, Daniel tensed when Lucy, still in his arms, spoke quietly. Hey, I changed my mind. It's okay if I don't see the ocean anymore. Maybe you should hand me over. The Count might forgive you if you do it now. He didn't want to hear it. Don't talk like that, not now. With that, Daniel forced himself to his feet. He intended to use a moment of loosened patrols to get just a little farther. But just as he moved toward the trees, a flashlight beam locked onto his back. There, he's over there. Shit, he's running, open fire. As soon as they spotted him, Daniel sprinted. Gunfire rang out behind him. Bullets slammed into trees, grazed past him, split the air around his body. Each time it happened, his muscles tensed involuntarily, but he didn't stop running. Will I survive this? He asked himself the question, but the answer was already clear. No, I won't. At this rate, death was inevitable. And still his feet kept moving. If it were just me, I might have given up. But in his arms, Lucy was curled up in terror. There was no way Daniel could let her see him give in. So he kept running. But willpower alone couldn't overcome everything. Bang! A distant shot rang out, and a stray bullet hit Daniel square in the shoulder. His body reeled violently. He nearly collapsed, but somehow managed to stay upright. The pain made him grit his teeth, but he could still move. Taking a breath, Daniel broke into another run. Praying for a miracle, for a sliver of survival for the both of them. Branches scraped his skin as he ran, but his vision was beginning to blur. His breathing was ragged. He couldn't get it under control. His sense of direction failed. His body tilted with every step. Only sheer willpower kept him going. But that didn't last long. Crack, his toe caught on a stone. His body pitched forward. With Lucy still in his arms, Daniel tumbled down the slope. The world spun chaotically. He rolled again and again down the incline, until his back slammed into a tree. GHH. Pain exploded from the wound in his shoulder. Daniel let out a short, sharp groan. Looking down, he confirmed that Lucy, still in his arms, was unharmed. Relief flickered through him for a moment, but it was meaningless. He rolled down the hill. This way, regroup on me. He could hear the voices of the soldiers not far off. So this is the result of all that struggling. His strength left him in a wave of futility. Resting his head against the tree, Daniel saw Lucy quietly sobbing like a lost child. Why would you go this far? Her small, trembling hand touched his chest. Why are you doing this for me? Why? As if she couldn't understand, Lucy choked on her words. Daniel didn't answer. He simply lifted a hand. He placed it gently on her head and spoke softly. I'm sorry, I said I'd show you the ocean. I don't want the ocean. Lucy yelled and hit his chest with her fists. There was no strength behind it. I didn't want the ocean. All she'd wanted was to be with the one person who understood her, Daniel. When she'd said they should go see the sea together, it was only because she hoped he'd be by her side when the day came to leave the mansion. The ocean hadn't mattered. To Lucy, Daniel was what mattered. Daniel understood what she meant. But there was no turning back, and even if he could, he'd make the same choices again. He couldn't ignore Hamilton's abuse. He couldn't let Count Colledra dispose of her without a word. "I see him, all units take aim." The soldiers were close now. Daniel knew it was over. His dry lips parted. "Lieutenant, I guess this is the end for me. What a pathetic way to go. I promised I'd protect you, but—" Lucy's eyes widened. Daniel gave a bitter smile and lowered his hand from her head. "Forgive your useless commanding officer." Then Daniel closed his eyes. He didn't know what dying in a world of memory truly meant, but he was ready to accept it. And yet no gunshots came. Daniel waited and waited, but the sound never came. Confused, he slowly opened his eyes. The world had frozen. The soldiers were locked in place, fingers on their triggers. Even the grass in the wind had stopped moving, like a paused screen. And then, right before him stood Lucy. Not the Lucy who had been called young lady as a child, but Lucy Emilia, the one who wore the military uniform of his lieutenant. The only thing she shared with the girl from before were her crimson eyes, now filled with tears. "A lieutenant," Daniel spoke faintly, like someone seeing a vision in their final moments. Lucy lowered her head. Their lips met. He didn't resist. Breaths mingled, the scent of her filled his senses. In this colorless, frozen world, they were the only ones left in motion. Time passed slowly. And then as she pulled away, Lucy, breathless, grabbed Daniel's hand. In that instant, the world began to fracture. Everything in view cracked, as if it were about to collapse entirely. But neither Daniel nor Lucy paid it any mind. They kept their eyes only on each other. After a short silence, Lucy raised a hand to his cheek. "Daniel Steiner." Her lips moved with certainty, as if to say she would never forget. "I remember you." And with that, the false world began to fall apart. Chapter 216. Mansion of the House of Count Colledra. Temporary Operations Command Post. Urgent report. The enemy has completely seized Central Plaza. Our forces continue to retreat. We can't hold out much longer. You're telling me we're being pushed back this easily? We've got forces equivalent to a full division, and we're losing because of one man, Daniel Steiner. Face reality. The enemy's encirclement is tightening. If they press forward like this, the remaining troops in the city won't last long. While the staff officers, gripped by despair, argued among themselves, Colledra showed little interest. He simply stood at the window, looking down at the city as it echoed with blasts and eruptions. The chief of staff approached Colledra. His arm wrapped in a plaster cast, the chief of staff gave Colledra a respectful nod. "Your Excellency, the situation is dire. You should escape before the enemy breaks through to this location. I've already ordered a vehicle to be prepared within a safe range of the front. You won't have to worry about being caught by Daniel Steiner." Ordinarily, Colledra would have met such a suggestion with a glare like sharpened steel, but not today. Colledra was not a fool who would insist on fighting on a battlefield where defeat was guaranteed. The enemy shelling was drawing closer. Colledra, still staring out the window, spoke without turning his head. "What of the reinforcements?" 2 battalions were reportedly dispatched from Immgwc, but the situation turned unfavorable. According to the report, the transport train was derailed by enemy light tanks during movement. Moreover, the rail network has sustained damage, making further support unlikely. Colledra clenched his teeth and shut his eyes. He had suspected that Daniel Steiner's decision to conceal his forces to the north was somehow tied to the rail network, but having that suspicion confirmed only deepened his frustration. No matter how many possibilities he considered, there was no chance of victory on this battlefield. Opening his eyes slowly, Colledra let out a bitter breath and spoke as if in disbelief. "What do you think, Chief of Staff? Is Daniel Steiner truly a devil?" The Chief of Staff, unsure of Colledra's intent, could only remain silent. A few more distant shell bursts echoed before Colledra continued. "To my eyes, he's human. This overwhelming assault, there's anger in it. That's the only way I can explain it." There was emotion behind Daniel Steiner's tactics. He was not, as rumor had it, some maniac who found joy in annihilating the Allied forces. Even Daniel Steiner dies if he's shot, and he bleeds if he's cut. As long as he's wearing human skin, he can never be free from death. Colledra's grip tightened around his cane. Then why is it? From the sinking of the diplomatic vessel to this very moment, Daniel Steiner had repeatedly escaped the death traps Colledra had laid, turning each one into a counteroffensive. As if he were a demon risen from hell itself. Colledra had seen many battlefield commanders attack the Allied nations before, but none were as unpredictable as Daniel Steiner. And in war, unpredictability was synonymous with fear. Grinding his teeth, Colledra turned to the Chief of Staff standing beside him. "Lucy Emilia, she should have arrived at the mansion by now." The Chief of Staff hesitated, then finally opened his mouth, his expression troubled. "They say a critical error occurred during the memory erasure process. According to the doctor, it's a phenomenon they've never seen before. Resolving the issue will take significant time." In other words, Lucy could not be moved. Colledra groaned, a sharp headache stabbing through him, and muttered to himself, "Daniel Steiner, you really are trying to shatter the very foundation of the Allied nations." If Daniel Steiner had secured Lucy Emilia and captured Fenbark, the aftershocks would ripple far beyond this city. Emotionally, Colledra wanted to resist to the end, to somehow eliminate Daniel Steiner with his own hands, but no decision made under the sway of emotion could be sound. Accepting defeat, Colledra turned away, planning for what came next. Organize a small unit and issue the retreat order. It was a command he never wished to speak aloud, but with all paths blocked, there were no other choices left. From this moment forward, he took a step, then finished the sentence after a brief pause. "We abandoned Fenbark." Meanwhile, inside the lab, the doctor and the research team were moving frantically. Confirmed excessive neural response, her memories are being restored. Sensory feedback circuit stable, aligning waveform, neural sync ratio is rising normally. This is insane. I didn't think it was even possible. As the researchers raised their voices, the doctor adjusted his glasses and let out a dry laugh. Truly insane. According to the data on the control panel, not only were Lucy Emilia's memories being restored, but her consciousness was also resurfacing. Theoretically, entering someone's consciousness and unlocking memory suppression might have been within the realm of possibility, but realistically, it was a nearly impossible feat. If one were to suffer death within the other's memories, they could be deleted, in a sense, falling into a coma from which they might never return. That was why the doctor had warned Daniel Steiner of how dangerous this method was. But Daniel had saved Lucy Emilia without the slightest regard for his own life. He may be a man of the enemy nation, but the desire to rescue his lieutenant, even at such risk, was something noble. Holding that thought silently, the doctor manipulated the controls to terminate the consciousness sharing state. Then he powered down Daniel Steiner's auxiliary chamber. Now that Lucy's memories and consciousness had returned, there was no longer any reason to keep Daniel sealed inside the pod. When he pressed the unlock button, the chamber door slowly opened, and Daniel opened his eyes. His jet-black pupils blinked a few times as he stepped out of the chamber. At once, the company commander approached Daniel. "Brigadier General, sir, are you all right?" There was no way he could be. In the real world, only a few minutes had passed, but in the conscious realm it must have felt far longer. His mind would still be foggy, even just walking should have been difficult, but Daniel showed no sign of it. "How much time has passed?" Hearing Daniel's tone, no different from usual, the company commander breathed a sigh of relief and checked the time. "Exactly 3 minutes and 30 seconds since you entered the chamber." "I see, so the doctor wasn't lying after all." The doctor, catching Daniel's gaze, tensed slightly, but bowed his head in response. At that moment, approaching footsteps echoed nearby. "Welcome back safely, sir." Turning his head, Daniel saw the soldier who had taken care of his revolver and coat. With a brief word of thanks, Daniel accepted the coat and draped it over his shoulders. The company commander then spoke again. "Brigadier General, sir, may I ask what your next move will be? If we've taken the city center, we push through to the enemy's temporary command post. But before that..." Holstering his revolver, Daniel turned around. Following his gaze, the company commander saw Lucy Amelia, still enclosed within the central chamber. A faint, wistful smile crossed Daniel's face as he opened his mouth. "First, I should go greet Our Lady." "Our Lady?" The company commander was puzzled, but the doctor understood exactly what it meant. Daniel had likely lived an entire life inside Lucy's consciousness. There had no doubt been countless events within that world. "I'll open the central chamber." With that, the doctor manipulated the controls, and the entrance to the central chamber began to open. Daniel adjusted his coat as the doors parted completely. Lucy stood barefoot on the floor, slowly opening her eyes. The first thing she saw upon awakening from her long sleep was Daniel Steiner. Daniel, watching Lucy still struggling to grasp reality, let out a soft chuckle. "Lieutenant, what are you staring at like that? Don't look at your superior officer as if you've never seen him before." At the word "lieutenant," tears welled up in her eyes before she even realized it. She tried to speak, but her parched, cracked voice wouldn't come out. Their eyes met, and Lucy took a step forward. A wave of dizziness struck her at once, but she gritted her teeth and forced herself to endure it. All she could think about was getting closer to Daniel. 2 steps, 3 steps. Then, no longer able to hold back, Lucy broke into a run. Daniel was briefly startled, but quickly opened his arms and embraced her. Their bodies pressed tightly together. Clinging to him, Lucy began to sob like a child begging for affection. It was only natural. She stood at the brink of Daniel's death, then miraculously returned to reality. What she needed was confirmation that Daniel Steiner was truly alive and standing before her. "Lucy." Holding her tightly, Daniel spoke quietly. "One day let's go see the sea, this time with no one to get in the way." On the verge of tears again, Lucy nodded. And she tightened her grip on him just a little more. Lucy had always hated humans. She believed humans were life forms designed to inflict pain on others. Everyone in the mansion had mocked and neglected her. That belief had formed naturally. But meeting a single man in the Empire had slowly changed her. Perhaps humans could also be beings who brought happiness to others. That thought had solidified during her time within her childhood memories. Because Daniel had risked his life to protect her inside that world. She knew he had tried to sacrifice himself, expecting nothing in return. Because of him, Lucy could now believe in people. She no longer had to see life as suffering or wear cynicism like armor. The man who showed her that the world wasn't colorless after all was standing right before her. That was why Lucy made a vow. She would never again hide her emotions. The feelings she had repressed, because she was a spy of the Allied nations, bloomed in that moment like a flower. Only then did Lucy finally understand. I'm in love with Daniel Steiner, the only man in this world. Chapter 217. With Lucy secured, Daniel immediately led his troops in a charge toward the mansion. Though part of his motivation was a personal grudge against Khalidra, the larger objective was to shatter enemy morale, bringing an end to the wasteful skirmishes erupting across the city. The Allied soldiers stationed near the mansion, seeing Daniel Steiner advancing with tanks and infantry in tow, raised their white flags without resistance. The Imperial Army had pushed all the way to the mansion near the heart of the city. That alone signaled that the city had fallen, and further resistance was meaningless. Thanks to that, Daniel was able to neutralize the enemy and occupy the mansion with ease. Even if they've surrendered, don't let your guard down. Sweep the mansion thoroughly. There could be hidden forces. Round up all civilians in the parlor for now. If anyone resists or attacks Imperial soldiers, you're authorized to subdue them immediately. The enemy may have disguised themselves. Move, find the enemy's command post. Move your damn legs, you slugs. As the officers barked out orders, Imperial soldiers rushed up and down the mansion's halls. Amid the chaos, Daniel walked calmly, eventually glancing back with a sigh. There was Lucy, quietly exhaling, her fatigue barely hidden. He had told her to stay behind somewhere safe and rest, but she had insisted on coming with him, and now it was showing. "Lieutenant, I'll call for a medic. Why don't you go back and rest?" "I'm fine. I have a slight fever, but it's nothing I can't endure." "Enduring isn't the point." Daniel trailed off and shook his head. He knew better than to argue when Lucy was this determined. "Is there someone you're worried about in this mansion? Or is there something you need to resolve? Surely you don't have business with Count Khalidra. He must have fled by now. Which means you must be thinking of one of the servants." Lucy flinched ever so slightly, her pupils trembling. Daniel caught it immediately and clasped his hands behind his back. "Conveniently, I've already ordered all civilians in the mansion gathered in the parlor. They should be assembled by now. Go. But as your lieutenant, I should be at your side. Following your superior officer's orders is part of your duty too, isn't it?" Granting her independent movement during wartime was no small act of trust. Lucy hesitated, then looked up at Daniel. "Understood. Then please tell me where you'll be. If something happens, I'll come immediately." There was no reason not to tell her. "I plan to track down their command post. We stormed the place with plenty of noise. Count Khalidra no doubt ran, but he'll have left traces. Some of the signal operators and officers may still be inside, trying to report the mansion's fall." "Exactly, so I intend to have a little chat with Count Khalidra." Understanding Daniel's intent, Lucy gave him a slight nod. Daniel gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't push yourself. If it's too much, lean on me whenever you need to. That promise, I still mean it." Lucy's cheeks flushed with subtle color. Just as she raised her head, about to offer thanks, Daniel gave her shoulder a reassuring pat and turned to walk away. Lucy stood there staring at his back, her heart pounding wildly in her chest as she struggled to calm herself. Only after Daniel turned a corner with the soldiers and disappeared did she finally snap out of it. "Don't be stupid." Reprimanding herself, she took a deep breath and headed toward the parlor. "Captain Lucy." "Welcome." The soldiers posted at the parlor saluted as Lucy approached and opened the door. Inside stood numerous mansion servants, dressed in tidy clothing. Some were unfamiliar, but several were faces she recognized. They were the ones who had shunned her in her childhood. At the sight of Lucy, they bowed their heads like criminals awaiting judgment. As she watched their fearful expressions, someone stepped forward from among them. "Move, please, wait, excuse me." A young woman pushed her way through the crowd. Short and freckled, she bore a striking resemblance to Melly, the maid who had once been close to Lucy. "Come on," I said, "move, seriously." Seeing Namria struggling with her small frame to squeeze through, made Lucy let out a small, involuntary laugh. Finally pushing through the crowd, Namria spotted Lucy's smile and beamed. "My lady, you're safe, thank goodness." She rushed forward with quick little steps and took Lucy's hands in hers. "When the soldiers took you away, I was so scared. They looked like such bad people. I tried to stop them, but they shoved me aside." Everyone else had been trembling before Lucy, but Namria's was chattering away like she was simply greeting an old friend. And Lucy didn't hate it. In fact, it warmed her. "I kept praying for you to come back, my lady, and maybe God really heard me. Although I'm a little worried, since there are so many Imperial soldiers here and all." Namria's trailed off suddenly, sucking in a shallow breath. It had only just dawned on her that Lucy, too, was an officer in the Imperial Army. Watching Lucy carefully, Namria spoke in a small, nervous voice. You're not thinking anything strange, are you, my lady? I mean, of course, someone like me would never question your judgment, but still." She was afraid Lucy might take revenge on the servants. Lucy listened silently, then looked around the parlor again. Now, many of the older servants were in tears, no doubt remembering their past wrongs. In the past, she might have thought those tears were just another performance, a desperate act of submission to save themselves. But now she knew better. They weren't evil, they were simply people. People who had once stood by in silence as she suffered, and who would have been sentenced to death by Count Caladra had they resisted. So Lucy made a choice. She would no longer hate people. "There's no need to worry." She looked down at Namria's and spoke softly. "I told you before, Brigadier General Steiner won't harm civilians. And you believe that too, my lady." "I do." Recalling Daniel's face, Lucy gave a gentle smile. "I'm just like him." Meanwhile, Count Caladra and his staff, having escaped the city using a spare conversion etherlium stone, were retreating quickly in 3 separate military vehicles. The confidence they once radiated as they stormed into Fenbark at the head of 2 regiments was now gone, replaced by a heavy silence that weighed down the air. One of the staff officers, studying a map, let out a low breath and spoke. "Major, I recommend diverting northwest at the next junction. There's a chance the enemy may deploy aerial reconnaissance. We should stick to the forest as much as possible." No one remarked on the fact that the major himself was behind the wheel. The situation was that desperate. Whether it was the bitterness of defeat or the grim weight of what lay ahead, even breathing felt like a struggle. The air was suffocating. Seated tensely in the passenger seat, the communications officer suddenly grabbed the radio, reacting to interference from the other end. Wondering what it was, he raised the receiver to his ear and froze. "This is Daniel Steiner. Connect me to Count Caladra." It was Daniel Steiner, contacting them directly. Swallowing dryly, unsure of how to respond, the communications officer turned toward the back seat. "Your Excellency, Daniel Steiner is asking for you." Caladra's eyebrow twitched. He stretched out his hand, as if the rest didn't even need to be said. The officer passed him the receiver, and Caladra pressed the transmit button. "Do you have something you want to say to me?" There was a brief pause before the reply came. "Surrender." Caladra clenched his teeth and spat out a response, dumbfounded. "Surrender? You think capturing Fenbark means you've won this war. Don't be arrogant. So long as I draw breath, the allied nations will never submit to the Empire. Static buzzed for a moment before Daniel's voice returned. Then I'll grant your wish and turn the allied nations into a sea of fire. I'll find you in that hell, screaming, and I will kill you. The voice dropped another degree in temperature. Everyone who follows you will meet the same end. Sweat broke out across the brows of Collidra's staff as they listened. The transmission ended. In silence, Collidra slowly lowered the receiver and raised a trembling hand to his forehead. After this battle, Daniel Steiner would rise to become the Empire's one and only true war commander. Collidra exhaled in frustration, grinding his teeth. Someday, I'll see this through to the end. He clenched that vow, burning with hatred for the one man he now considered his only true rival, Daniel Steiner. Chapter 218. Having seized the mansion and delivered his warning to Count Collidra, Daniel used the Allied nation's radio operator to issue a broadcast to the scattered defensive forces still engaged in skirmishes throughout the city. He informed them that Count Collidra had abandoned them and fled. If they valued their lives, they were to surrender immediately. He added, almost as an afterthought, that if they continued to resist, he would hunt down every last one of them and execute them without exception. It wasn't just a radio transmission. Daniel reinforced the message through the city's public broadcast station, now under Imperial control. Once the Fenbark defense troops realized their comms had been hijacked, they began to surrender one by one, waving white flags and laying down arms. The city's occupation proceeded smoothly. Daniel rounded up all captured personnel and had them confined in a nearby church designated as a temporary POW camp, then turned his attention to establishing a command post and securing communications. The next day, after establishing a secure line with Central Command, Daniel submitted his report and immediately shifted into a defensive posture. Troops that had entered the city for the initial offensive were repositioned, and a reserve unit was formed. Though Fenbark was now under Imperial control, 2 enemy regiments were still stationed beyond the bridge. Preparing for a potential counteroffensive was essential. Daniel gave orders to deploy anti-tank weapons and artillery around the city's perimeter and approach roads. He positioned armored units along expected enemy routes of advance. Then, after instructing Intelligence Officer Phelps to schedule a formal visit to City Hall, Daniel left the city outskirts with Lucy at his side. He was conducting a field inspection to ensure his orders were being carried out. Surveying the surroundings, he noted proper fortification of field gun and mortar emplacements near the hills. Not far off, tanks, core assets of his unit, were positioned with their turrets aimed squarely at the forest line. If they come at us, we'll smash them to pieces. We've got comrades to avenge. Agreed. This time it's not us taking the hits, it's those bastards. We're going to punish them thoroughly. Angle on the emplacements is perfect. We've got first visual contact on them. This'll be an easy fight. There was a trace of laughter in the soldiers and officers' voices. Morale was high. One officer, spotting Daniel, stiffened and saluted at once. "Be Brigadier General, sir. Apologies, we didn't expect an inspection." Despite being older than the young general, the officer's salute was filled with both tension and respect. Daniel returned the salute and continued walking with Lucy. "The emplacements are solid. I don't even need to offer any corrections." Lucy nodded in agreement, though a thought lingered in her mind. "Brigadier General, since we're defending the city, we may hold the advantage in battle, but the enemy still outnumbers us. If they break through here, we'll be forced into urban combat. Wouldn't it be wise to secure key positions in the city ahead of time?" A sound tactical observation, but Lucy was missing one critical piece of information. That won't be necessary. We're receiving reinforcements from headquarters. Reinforcements? Yes, and this time they're real, not a feint. The moment the floodgates are breached, Brigadier General Heinrich's Immgwc Mobile Brigade is scheduled to begin their advance on this location. Only then did Lucy understand the reason for Daniel's calm demeanor. The enemy's provisional division had been isolated when Count Kolodra abandoned his command post and fled. With no means of obtaining new intel, the enemy was effectively blind and deaf. Unable to surrender outright, they would likely attempt to retake Fenbark by leveraging their superior numbers. A battle here was inevitable. But once the elite Immgwc Mobile Brigade of the Empire struck from the rear, the enemy would be caught in a pincer movement. Their morale would collapse under the shock of simultaneous assault, and victory would follow swiftly. "If there's anything I'm worried about in this operation," Daniel muttered, "it's having to meet Brigadier General Heinrich again." Heinrich had been the one to jokingly call Daniel a bloodthirsty wolf during the Nordia invasion campaign, laughing heartily as he did. He'd also dumped the unwanted post of garrison commander onto Daniel before conveniently vanishing. As far as Daniel was concerned, there were no fond memories there. He shook his head, as if trying to dislodge the old memories. "In any case, I think today's field inspection has been sufficient. I'll return for now. Lieutenant, you'll stay behind and complete the rest of the inspection in my place, then report back to me." "What? I understood. You're heading to City Hall." At her question, Daniel nodded. "Yes, I have important business with the city's mayor." Meanwhile, in the City Hall reception room. "Listen, if there's something you want, I'd appreciate it if you just say so." There was a faint tremor in Mayor Keimbollet's voice. And understandably so. Lined along the walls of the reception room were Daniel Steiner's favored grenadiers, standing at evenly spaced intervals. All fully armed, radiating oppressive presence. In contrast, seated calmly across from the mayor was Intelligence Officer Phelps, his expression composed, as if inviting reassurance. "I don't understand your concern, sir. Didn't I just tell you? The Brigadier General wishes to meet and speak with you personally." "Yes, I heard that. But surely we can't just sit here like this without knowing what he wants. I mean, if you gave me even a hint, I could prepare something, anything. Don't you agree?" Glancing around nervously, Keimbollet leaned forward and whispered low enough for only Phelps to hear. "So, the Brigadier General, does he want money? If that's the case, tell him not to worry, I can arrange it quickly. If he prefers, I can prepare it in bullion instead of cash." Keimbollet trailed off mid-sentence. Phelps' eyes had turned cold. For someone who held deep respect for Daniel, the mere implication that this was all about money was revolting. Reading the shift in atmosphere, Keimbollet swallowed hard and leaned back. Phelps stared at him in silence for a moment before speaking quietly. "Choose your words carefully, because right now, the one who owns Fenbark is none other than the Brigadier General." There was frost in the threat. Keimbollet nodded weakly, unsettled. It was just then, as Phelps returned to a calm smile. Creak! The wooden door to the reception room opened, and a tall officer entered. Wearing a uniform adorned with the White Dragon Order of Martial Distinction, he was a man Keimbollet knew well, Daniel Steiner. Daniel met the mayor's eyes and gave a small smile as he approached. Keimbollet scrambled to his feet, but Daniel raised a hand. "Brigadier General Daniel Steiner, I currently command a unit under direct authority from General Staff. I'm Mayor Keimbollet of Fenbark." They exchanged a brief handshake, after which Daniel gestured toward the sofa. "Why don't we sit down and talk?" Yes, that sounds best." Keimbollet obediently took a seat. Daniel sat across from him and placed his uniform cap on the table, exchanging a few quiet words with Phelps before turning to face the mayor again. Were things less hectic, I'd prefer to share a meal and speak at length, but I'm pressed for time, so I hope you'll understand if we handle matters here in the reception room. Of course, it's an honor that you're seeing me personally. May I ask what this is about? Ah, yes, that. Daniel stroked his chin, as if the matter were nothing serious. I'd like you to testify that Count Kalidra conducted human experimentation in Fenbark. Kimbalit's mouth hung open. He had no idea things had escalated to this point, and more than that, he couldn't understand how Daniel Steiner even knew about it. On top of that, being asked to betray Count Kalidra weighed on him like a stone. Human experimentation, that's. Watching Daniel carefully, Kimbalit forced a strained smile. I don't quite understand what you're saying. Are you claiming human experimentation took place in my city? Denying it, of course. Daniel wasn't surprised. It was the expected response. Mayor Kimbalit, according to what I've gathered, you've remained in office before and after the war. You were certainly mayor when the lab was built here, weren't you? That's well. City development projects, especially internal construction, require the mayor's approval. Even if the military issues direct orders, the reports still reach your desk. A thin smile touched Daniel's lips. So I find it hard to believe you didn't know. Kimbalit's eyes trembled like a man trapped with no exit. But he couldn't betray Count Kalidra. Not out of loyalty, but because he, too, had profited greatly by turning a blind eye to the experiments in Fenbark. More than once, he had even actively assisted them. There was no choice left to him. Kimbalit steeled himself. A mayor doesn't have access to every detail of military operations. Daniel stared at him, then shrugged. Very well. In that case, let's see whether you're lying or not. Would you be willing to take a lie detector test? The lie detector. The Imperial Army has recently unveiled a new state-of-the-art model. Since you seem curious, I'll show you. Unveiled, not developed. Kimbalit was confused, but before he could say anything, Daniel clapped twice. The door opened, and a woman in a crisp military uniform stepped in. Her poised presence, paired with her calm smile beneath classic lashes, had an almost sacred air to it. Kimbalit blinked in confusion at Freen's approach, then looked to Daniel as if seeking an explanation. You're not seriously suggesting that this young lady is your lie detector, are you? Kimbalit's face twisted with incredulity, as if he just heard an absurd joke. Then he laughed aloud. You plan to extract a confession from me. I haven't lied, of course, but how exactly do you expect this woman to catch my lies? What, is she a priestess here to take my confession? Given that he knew nothing of Freen's reputation, his response was to be expected. But rather than 100 explanations, one real demonstration would suffice. Well, as Phelps looked at the mayor with a hint of pity, Daniel smiled quietly. You'll understand soon enough. Chapter 219. The next morning. Snowfield Highlands near the Republic's border. Is this the place where that weirdo's supposed to live? At his subordinate's comment, Bylov, an intelligence agent for the Republic, wiped the sweat from his brow. Whether it was the climbing or the heavy mountaineering gear, he didn't know. But even surrounded by snow, heat ruled his body. Yes, but don't call him a weirdo. He doesn't like that. He prefers to be called a great mage, so keep that in mind. A great mage. A great mage. In an era where magic had all but lost its effectiveness, save for a few rare abilities. Even the title of mage had faded into history. Calling someone a great mage now was almost laughable. It's surprising that someone still clings to magic in this day and age. What's even more surprising is that the government's classed him as a high-risk individual. That just shows you don't know anything. He might be eccentric, but his abilities are real. Seriously. Bylov nodded as he trudged through the snow. There was no longer a need to keep things hidden. This man would be his successor soon enough. Do you remember the assassination of Al Rapimmel? Of course I do. He was a Politburo member who rebelled against the High Council, traitor to the state, colluding with the military for a full-scale coup. Then you must also know that Al Rapimmel's death remains something of a mystery. Yes, at the time he was holed up deep inside an air raid bunker, giving orders while gripped by paranoia. But then, one day, without any warning, the subordinate stopped mid-sentence. He finally understood why Bylov was bringing this up. The one who had slipped through the bunker's tight security, killed Al Rapimmel, and walked out untouched, was the very same weirdo they were here to meet. The subordinate swallowed dryly, realizing this man was a far greater figure than he'd expected. Bylov gave a low chuckle and looked ahead. We're almost there. Ahead, perched atop a sheer cliff, stood a three-story building. Its structure looked slightly off-kilter, as if the balance was somehow wrong. The subordinate tilted his head. That's a strange building. I'm amazed it hasn't collapsed. You can think that all you like. Just don't say it in front of him. He calls that place his Mage Tower. And got it. With that reply, Bylov walked up to the building and gave a light knock on the door. And it opened inward on its own. As his subordinate stared in awe, Bylov simply shrugged. I don't know how it works either. Some kind of magic, apparently. Anyway, follow me and don't touch anything. Bylov stepped inside. The Gothic-style interior was cluttered with all manner of strange objects, most of which looked far too arcane to even guess their use. Apparently used to this site, Bylov headed straight for the spiral staircase at the center of the room. Ignoring the second floor, which was filled with fish tanks, he climbed all the way to the third. And there he saw him. A man in a flowing robe, peering into a celestial telescope, gazing up at the morning sky. The subordinate, arriving moments later, muttered without thinking. Why's he using a telescope in the daytime? Whether he'd heard or simply felt the tone, the weirdo responded in a languid voice. A true star knows how to shine even through the veil of light. Not that a pebble like you could understand such things, even if I explained them 100 times. His tone was sharp, almost barbed. Bylov shot his subordinate a glance, then placed a hand over his chest and bowed deeply. A humble being dares to greet the great mage Sarel. Please forgive my subordinate's rudeness. Well, what choice do I have? Pebbles like you make mistakes all the time. We thank you for your gracious tolerance. Sarel gave a light shrug. So, what are you here to bother me about this time? Bylov took a breath before replying. Have you perhaps heard that Count Kalidra was recently defeated in Fenbark? Of course, the stars whispered it to me, a most disgraceful defeat, I hear. In relation to that loss, Count Kalidra and the Republic's High Council would like to request your assistance. Adjusting the angle of his telescope slightly, Sarel spoke casually. They want me to eliminate Daniel Steiner, don't they? Blunt, the words left Bylov speechless for a moment. After hesitating, he finally nodded. Yes, Count Kalidra has offered a conversion Ethereum stone in return. The High Council is also prepared to offer every convenience. HMPH, the Republic, the Allied Nations. I've helped both of you before, haven't I? And now you're back asking for more, no shame at all. Was that a rejection? Cold sweat trickled down Bylov's back until Sarel chuckled softly. Fine, I'll help. That Daniel Steiner fellow has piqued my interest anyway, but not now. You'll have to wait a few months. Stargazing is more fun at the moment. Bylov exhaled in relief. On behalf of the High Council, I thank you for your patriotic decision. The Republic will prepare all necessary resources for your aid. As you should. Now tell me more about this Daniel Steiner. Who does he like? What foods does he prefer? What does he hate? I want everything. Sarah finally turned from the telescope, a faint smile on his lips, his crimson eyes gleaming. I need to know. The smile sharpened just slightly. So it'll feel good when I kill him. Huh, that had to feel nice, right? Lucy immediately glanced around in a panic at Namria's remark. Thankfully, the hallway was empty. She let out a quiet sigh of relief. Namria's, keep your voice down. Lucy's cheeks were faintly flushed as she whispered back. Namria's crossed her arms. What for? It's not like I'm making anything up. Brigadier General Daniel Steiner's in his prime and you're objectively pretty. There's no way he didn't enjoy kissing you. How had it come to this? Simple. After Lucy had granted her some freedom within the estate, Namria's had run into her in the hallway while fetching coffee for the Imperial Army staff. Since they were headed in the same direction, small talk naturally turned to romance. Recalling a romance novel she'd read ages ago, Namria's asked Lucy whether she'd ever kissed a man. Lucy had fallen silent. She hadn't wanted to blurt out the fact that she'd kissed Daniel. But silence alone couldn't hide the flushed face and flickering eyes. Namria's, already aware of Lucy's feelings for Daniel, had pounced. You kissed the Brigadier General, didn't you? Lucy denied it at first, but under Namria's relentless questioning, she finally confessed. And then she voiced a concern. Was I just swept up in the moment? Did I do something terrible to the general? To Namria's, it was the most ridiculous worry imaginable. If you're that worried, why not just ask Brigadier General Steiner directly? Ask me what? Hi, Ava. Namria's jumped at the deep voice that suddenly cut in. Daniel Steiner stood before them in full uniform, having just turned the hallway corner. While Namria's clutched at her startled heart, Daniel tilted his head. Were you talking about me? He looked toward Lucy as if asking for clarification, but she too averted her gaze. Puzzled, Daniel's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Lieutenant. His voice grew gentle with concern. You look unwell. If this is a side effect from the lab incident, don't hesitate to tell me. I'll do everything I can for you. No, it's not that. Wearing a faintly worried expression, Daniel suddenly reached for her hand. There's no need to hide your feelings from me. Others may judge you, but I'll always be on your side. Lucy's cheeks flushed even deeper. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the urge to cling to him like a child. Watching the two, Namria's thought to herself. Why is he so good at this? Brigadier General Steiner, you're not a womanizer, are you? Eyes narrowing suspiciously, she studied Daniel with growing doubt. Not knowing the full story, Namria's couldn't help but see him as some kind of smooth-talking playboy. Chapter 220. As Namria's watched her with suspicion in her eyes, Lucy let out a small cough. Because if she stayed still like this, it felt like her true feelings would be exposed. I'm really fine. More importantly, were you on your way to the command post? As Lucy subtly withdrew her hand and spoke, Daniel nodded. Yes, I need to prepare for the upcoming battle, and there are reports I need to receive. Where are you headed, Lieutenant? As I mentioned yesterday, I'm on my way to speak with the city's religious leaders for the civil affairs operation. To get a read on social sentiment and request cooperation, Quelling internal unrest is important too. Good work. Call for support if you need it. Daniel lightly tapped Lucy on the shoulder before walking off. As she watched Daniel's back, Lucy felt Namria's gaze on her. Wondering why, she turned around and saw Namria's sigh with a frustrated expression. Young lady, be honest with me, just me. You like Brigadier General Daniel Steiner, don't you? Startled, Lucy glanced toward Daniel. She fidgeted, anxious that he might have heard, but soon she was able to relax. They were a fair distance apart now. At this range, he definitely wouldn't have heard. Lucy exhaled quietly, her eyes half-lidded and her lips moved. Yeah, I like him. It was more than liking, she loved him. Enough to want to experience everything lovers do with him. If it were possible, she wanted to travel with him. In the spring, she wanted to go somewhere filled with tulips and make memories with just the two of them. In the summer, she wanted to talk late into the night by the beach, where the cool breeze blew. In the fall, she wanted to walk along paths dyed with every color of autumn leaves, holding hands tightly. And in the winter, she wanted to make a snowman while chattering away in a snowy field. Things that might be ordinary to someone else would become precious memories for Lucy. But she knew these weren't wishes she could speak out loud just because she wanted to. As long as the war didn't end, peace would never come. What about Brigadier General Daniel Steiner? Namria's words broke her reverie. Lucy blinked, unsure what she'd just heard. Then Namria's whispered, "Does the general like you too, young lady?" That Lucy couldn't answer right away. She sank into thought. Daniel had devoted himself to her, both in reality and within her memories. But could she really declare that he did all of that because he liked her? It wouldn't be illogical to say he did it simply for his subordinate, or because he felt sympathy. I don't know, I really don't. She never asked him directly, so of course she didn't know. As Lucy stood there in thought, Namria stared at her and slowly formed a sly smile. All right, then I think it's time we find out how the general feels. I've got a few methods I've used before just for you. I'll share them. Want to hear? Yes. When it came to love, Namria's was Lucy Sr. Lucy hesitated for a moment, but in the end, her curiosity won out. She gave a small nod. Yeah, I want to hear. She thought just a little couldn't hurt. When Daniel entered the command post, the staff officers who had been exchanging opinions all rose from their seats in unison. Brigade Commander. You've arrived, sir. Daniel acknowledged their greetings with a nod and made his way to the head seat at the operations table set up in the command post. After scanning the operations map, Daniel cast his gaze toward Phelp, his intelligence officer. The enemy's provisional division still hasn't managed to cross the river, has it? That's correct. The destruction of the sluice gates collapsed the bridge, and the rising water level has made it impossible for them to ford the river. However, as the water level is receding, we assess that they'll soon advance toward Fenbark. The enemy's numbers are high, but we can respond accordingly. The operations officer interjected. It seems the enemy's tank battalion, which was crossing the bridge at the time of the sluice explosion, suffered severe damage. With more than 500 drowned and 30 tanks submerged, they've effectively lost a major asset. Even so, though the disparity in troop numbers remained large, it wasn't something to be overly concerned about. Intelligence officer, have we made contact with the Magitek Mobile Brigade? Phelp nodded. Yes, sir. We've confirmed stable communications. They said they'll be able to join us on schedule. Also, Brigadier General Heinrich asked me to relay a message to you. And what message? Well, Phelp hesitated for no reason, cleared his throat, and shouted in a loud voice. O Wolf of the Empire, you've done well tearing into the enemy commander. Now that we've got your back, don't hold back, run wild. I can't wait to see you again and swap war stories. I'll see you on the battlefield. Having delivered the flamboyant impression flawlessly, Phelp cleared his throat again. That's what he asked me to pass on. Did he specifically request that you do the impression too? Yes, sir. It was so absurd that a hollow chuckle escaped him. Still, it wasn't entirely unwelcome. If the Magitech Mobile Brigade lends their support, we'll crush them easily. That would put an end to the battle for Fenbark and complete the mission. And if that happens, he could return to the capital. It meant spending his days in a safe, prosperous city instead of a blood-soaked battlefield. Once I'm back in the capital, I'll speak to Her Majesty. I'll tell her I won't return to the battlefield again. He was fed up with the front lines. Things had turned out well and ended in victory, but the opposite scenario would have been a complete disaster. That didn't mean he'd abandoned his intent to deal with Count Caladra. He simply wanted to serve in a safe rear-line post instead of fighting at the front. I've done more than enough, haven't I? The chief of the general staff wouldn't refuse me. Even someone as devoted to the Empire's victory as the chief wouldn't flatly deny a request from a decorated soldier and toss him back onto the front lines. Good, this will be my final battle, but to make it certain. As he was mentally sketching out the plan, a knock came at the door. Brigadier Commander, Lieutenant Freen, Medical Officer. I've brought Mayor Immgwc with me. He said he has something urgent to report. Already, when Daniel told them to come in, the door opened and Freen and Immgwc entered. Immgwc, pale and gasping for breath, was a stark contrast to Freen, who wore a merciful smile. Of course, to the other officers who knew what Freen had done, that smile wasn't merciful in the slightest. Immgwc, scanning the command post, spotted Daniel and dropped to his knees. I'll tell you everything, I'll talk, just please tell her to stop this madness. Watching the man plead desperately, Daniel gestured toward Freen. As Freen approached, she blinked her eyes innocently at him. What is it, sir? Is there something you're curious about? I knew this would happen eventually, but it's sooner than expected. Didn't your so-called confession ritual start just this morning? Actually, I tried a new method this time. Thanks to the improvements in my healing magic, I'm now able to use some techniques I couldn't before. Techniques you couldn't use before? Brigadier Commander, are you aware that the most intense pain a person can feel is from burning? Daniel decided not to ask any further. Curiosity killed the cat, after all. A strange sense of fear crept over Daniel as he looked down at Immgwc. You're saying you're willing to admit that Count Caladra carried out human experimentation here in Fenbark. I admit it, it's the truth, but... Even in fear, Immgwc looked up at Daniel. I will never forget that the Imperial Army also carried out torture on civilians. Torture, you say? Daniel gave a low laugh and stepped toward Immgwc. Can you prove that we tortured you? What are you? I asked if you can prove it. Immgwc couldn't answer easily. It was true that Freen had burned him, but there wasn't a trace of it left on his body. Healing magic was not omnipotent by nature. Normally, even when used, recovery was slow or scars would remain. But Freen's healing was advanced enough to restore the body to its original state. With no burn marks remaining, there was no way to prove he'd been tortured. Or perhaps you have a witness. Again, Immgwc couldn't answer. There hadn't been a witness to begin with. It was only then that Immgwc realized he could never escape Daniel Steiner. His hands trembled. In front of the trembling man, Daniel Steiner lowered himself onto one knee. For a moment, their eyes met. Daniel's cold gaze made Immgwc flinch instinctively. Immgwc, if you have any conscience, don't lie. You call yourself a civilian. When hundreds of orphans died in the research lab, you stood by and did nothing, and you expect me to believe you weren't involved in the war. As Daniel growled, Immgwc's gaze dropped. Frankly, I'd love nothing more than to crush your throat right here and now. But the only reason I'm letting you live is because you still have the slightest bit of use left. So don't test my patience. You'll get one warning, and this is it. With that, Daniel stood. Smiling once more, He looked down at the still trembling Kaimborit and spoke. Well then, let me ask again, Mayor Kaimborit, were you tortured by the Imperial Army? A sob crept into Kaimborit's breath. No, sir, I acted of my own volition. Closing his eyes tightly, Kaimborit bowed his head toward Daniel. I am merely confessing the misdeeds of Count Kaledra. Submission and surrender. That was the only way to survive under Daniel Steiner.